Arthur Garrison Pierce grabbed the investigator by his throat and slammed him against the wall. "You told me that trunk was destroyed in 1952, he hissed through clenched teeth. "You told me there was nothing left." The investigator's face turned purple. "Sir, I swear we searched everywhere. The attic, the basement, every room. There was nothing." Arthur released him, watching the man crumple to the floor, gasping. "Then explain to me how a pregnant cleaning woman found documents that could destroy my entire family." He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Get everyone now. I want that woman found. I want those papers back. And I want this handled the same way my grandfather handled the Whitmores." His voice dropped to ice. "Permanently." Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story moves you, make sure you subscribe, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about justice. The eviction notice had been taped to Sarah Mitchell's door like a death sentence. She ripped it down with trembling hands and read the words she already knew by heart. 30 days, 4 weeks, 720 hours until she and her unborn daughter would be homeless. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Hendricks, her landlord. "We need to talk, today, 2 p.m., no excuses." Sarah pressed her hand against her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant, 6 months widowed, and now this. "What are we gonna do, baby girl?" she whispered. "What the hell are we gonna do?" The apartment was silent. David's ghost didn't answer. He never did anymore. She remembered the morning he died like it was yesterday. He'd kissed her forehead, pressed his palm against her barely visible bump, and said, "Take care of our little one, I'll be home for dinner." He never came home. Scaffolding collapse. Instant death. Those were the words the foreman used when he showed up at her door, hard hat in his hands, unable to meet her eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. There was nothing anyone could do." Nothing anyone could do. That phrase haunted her. The insurance company had used it too right before they explained all the reasons they wouldn't be paying her claim. "The investigation found evidence of improper safety protocols, Mrs. Mitchell. Your husband signed a waiver acknowledging the risks. There was nothing anyone could do. Nothing except leave a pregnant widow with a stack of medical bills and a husband-sized hole in her life." Sarah crumpled the eviction notice and threw it at the wall. It bounced off and landed on the floor, mocking her with its official letterhead and legal language. 30 days. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number this time. She almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers were always debt collectors now, but something made her swipe to accept. "Mrs. Mitchell." A woman's voice, formal and clipped. "This is Eleanor Crane. I'm an attorney handling an estate matter." "If this is about David's case, I already told the other lawyers. This isn't about your husband, Mrs. Mitchell. I have a job offer." Sarah's breath caught. "A job. Light work. Organizing documents, taking photographs, cataloging contents. A week, possibly 2. $800 cash." $800 wouldn't save her, but it might buy her time. Time to figure something out. Time to find another option. "What's the catch?" Sarah asked, because there was always a catch. "No catch. The property is the old Whitmore mansion on Willow Lane. I need someone trustworthy and detail-oriented. Your former employer at the dental office spoke highly of you." The Whitmore mansion. Everyone in Hartford knew that place. The massive Victorian house that had been empty for decades, slowly rotting behind its iron gates. Kids used to dare each other to climb the fence. Ghost stories circulated every Halloween. "I'm 7 months pregnant," Sarah said carefully. "I can't do heavy lifting." "That won't be necessary. Can you start tomorrow?" Tomorrow. That was fast. Almost too fast. "Yes," Sarah heard herself say. "I can start tomorrow." 9 a.m. I'll meet you there with the keys." The line went dead. Sarah stood in her empty apartment holding her phone, wondering if she'd just made the best decision of her life or the worst. Her baby kicked hard like she was casting a vote. "Okay," Sarah said. "We're doing this." She had no idea what she was walking into, none at all. Mr. Hendricks showed up at exactly 2 o'clock. He didn't bother knocking, just used his master key and walked in like he owned the place, which technically he did. "Mrs. Mitchell." He was a thick man with small eyes and a permanent sneer. "We need to discuss your situation." "I'm getting the money." Sarah stood her ground, refusing to back away, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. "I have a job. I start tomorrow." "A job?" Hendricks laughed. "Who's going to hire a woman who looks ready to pop any minute?" "Someone did. I'll have your money by the end of next week." "You said that last month." "This time I mean it." Hendricks stepped closer. Too close. Sarah could smell cigarettes and cheap cologne. "Let me explain something to you, Mrs. Mitchell. I've got people lined up for this apartment. Real tenants. People with jobs and money and husbands who aren't dead." Sarah's hand curled into a fist. Get out. 30 days, that's all you've got. And if you're 1 day late, 1 hour late, I'm changing the locks and putting your stuff on the curb." He smiled, showing yellow teeth. "Pregnancy won't save you. Nothing will save you. This is business." He left without closing the door. Sarah sank onto her couch, shaking. Her baby was kicking frantically now, responding to the stress hormones flooding Sarah's bloodstream. "It's okay," she whispered, rubbing her belly. "We're going to be okay. We have to be." But she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, staring at the water stain on her ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside her window. Cars passing, someone arguing in the apartment above, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. David used to hold her when she couldn't sleep. He'd wrap his arms around her and pull her close and whisper, "I've got you, Sarah. I've always got you." Now there was nothing but empty space where he used to be. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. A notification from her bank. Account balance $47.23, $47.23. That was everything she had in the world. Everything standing between her and complete destitution. $800 from this job would help. But it wouldn't be enough. Not nearly enough. She needed a miracle. Or at least a really good break. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. She'd stopped believing in prayer the day David died. Stopped believing in a lot of things. Her baby kicked again, gentler this time, almost reassuring. "Tomorrow," Sarah whispered. "Everything changes tomorrow." She had no idea how right she was. The Whitmore mansion looked worse in person than it did in her memories. Sarah pulled her Honda up to the rusted iron gates and felt her stomach drop. 3 stories of decay and abandonment rose against the gray morning sky. Paint peeled from the siding in long strips. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets, some boarded with plywood, others simply broken. The front steps sagged dangerously in the middle. A silver BMW was already parked in the circular drive. A thin woman in her 60s stood beside it, checking her phone. Eleanor Crane looked up as Sarah approached. Her eyes swept over Sarah's pregnant belly with an expression that was impossible to read. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're punctual." "You said 9. It's 9. Eleanor almost smiled. "Almost." "Here are the keys." She pressed a heavy iron ring into Sarah's hand. "They should open every door in the house. Your job is simple. Document everything. Photograph each room. Make lists of the contents. Note anything that seems valuable or historically significant." "What am I looking for exactly?" "Anything and everything. The estate is finally being liquidated after decades of legal complications. We need a complete inventory before we can proceed with the sale." Sarah looked up at the looming structure. Who would want to buy this place? Eleanor's expression flickered. Something that might have been worry crossed her face before disappearing behind professional composure. "That's not your concern, Mrs. Mitchell. Focus on the inventory. I'll return Friday to review your progress." "Wait," Sarah caught Eleanor's arm as she turned toward her car. "You said the house has been empty for decades. Why now? Why is this finally happening after all this time?" Eleanor studied her for a long moment. Some things have a way of working themselves out, eventually. "That's not really an answer." "No, it's not." Eleanor pulled her arm free. "One more thing, Mrs. Mitchell. If you find anything unusual, anything hidden or concealed, contact me immediately. Don't touch it. Don't move it. Just call." "Unusual how?" Eleanor was already walking away. "You'll know it if you see it." The BMW's engine purred to life. Gravel crunched under expensive tires. And then Sarah was alone with 3 stories of secrets and a growing certainty that this job was about much more than making an inventory. The front door took 3 keys and considerable force to open. Sarah stepped into the foyer and felt the weight of a century settle over her like a shroud. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling in the weak light that filtered through filthy windows. A grand staircase swept upward into shadows. A crystal chandelier dangled overhead, most of its prisms missing or broken. "Hello?" Sarah called out, feeling foolish. The house was empty, had been empty for longer than she'd been alive, but it didn't feel empty. Something was watching her, something in the walls and the shadows, in the thick silence that pressed against her ears like cotton. "Get a grip, Sarah," she muttered. "It's just an old house. Old houses are creepy, that's all." Her baby kicked sharply, as if disagreeing. Sarah pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. That was her job. Document everything. Make lists. Don't think about the way the shadows seemed to move at the edge of her vision. She worked her way through the first floor methodically. A grand parlor with furniture draped in white sheets that had turned gray with decades of dust. A dining room with a table that could seat 20, its surface obscured by mouse droppings and debris. A kitchen with a cast iron stove and shelves lined with dishes that crumbled when she tried to photograph them up close. In every room she found traces of the people who had lived here. A child's doll with a cracked porcelain face. A newspaper from 1918, its headlines screaming about the Spanish flu epidemic. A woman's glove, soft leather, monogrammed with an elegant W. Someone had loved this house once. Someone had filled it with life and laughter and all the small moments that make up a family. What had happened to them? Sarah found the first photograph in the parlor, tucked behind a stack of books on a dusty shelf. A formal family portrait in a tarnished silver frame. A stern man with a thick mustache stood rigidly in the center. Beside him, a beautiful woman in an elaborate dress, her expression serene but her eyes somehow sad. 2 children flanked them, a boy and a girl, both dressed in formal clothes that looked uncomfortable, and in the corner, almost hidden, a third figure. A young woman in servant's clothing, her face turned away from the camera. Sarah stared at the photograph for a long time. Why would a servant be in a family portrait? Why would she be turning away? She photographed the image and made a note. Ask Eleanor about family photographs. Then she moved on. By mid-afternoon, Sarah's back was screaming and her ankles had swollen to twice their normal size. She lowered herself into the least dusty chair she could find, a velvet settee in what had once been a music room, and pulled out the sandwich she'd brought from home. Her baby was restless, kicking and squirming like she sensed her mother's unease. "I know," Sarah said, rubbing her belly. "Something's not right about this place. I feel it too." She ate her sandwich in silence, listening to the house settle around her. Old buildings made noises. She knew that. Wood expanding and contracting, pipes groaning, foundations shifting. But these sounds were different. These sounded almost like footsteps, like someone moving around on the floor above her. Sarah held her breath, listening. Nothing. "You're losing it," she told herself. "Pregnancy hormones? Stress? That's all." She finished her sandwich, hauled herself to her feet, and went back to work. The second floor was bedrooms. Sarah worked her way down the hall, documenting each room in turn. A master suite with a 4-poster bed that had collapsed under its own rotting weight. Children's rooms with toys still scattered across the floor. A nursery with a cradle that made her heart ache. She photographed everything, trying not to think about the baby who had once slept in that cradle. Trying not to think about her own baby who would need a cradle soon. Who would need so many things Sarah couldn't afford? At the end of the hallway, she found a door that wouldn't open. She tried every key on the ring, jiggled the handle, put her shoulder into it. Nothing. "Fine," she said to the door. "Keep your secrets." She made a note and moved on. But as she walked away, she could have sworn she heard something on the other side. A soft sound like paper rustling, or someone breathing. She didn't go back to check. That night, Sarah dreamed of the house. She was walking through the hallways, but they were different. Newer. The wallpaper was fresh, the floors polished, the chandeliers blazing with warm light. Music drifted from somewhere below. A piano playing a waltz. Sarah climbed the stairs, following a sound she couldn't quite identify. A woman's voice speaking urgently. She walked down the hallway toward the locked door. But in the dream, it wasn't locked. It swung open at her touch. Inside, a woman sat at a writing desk. Young, beautiful, wearing a nightgown. Her hand moved frantically across paper writing as if her life depended on it. She looked up as Sarah entered. "You found it," the woman breathed. "You actually found it." Found what? The truth. The truth he tried to bury. The woman's eyes were wild with terror. "He killed my husband. He killed me too, though my heart kept beating for another year, and now he wants to kill you." Who wants to kill me? "Look in the attic." The woman was fading, her form becoming transparent. "Behind the wall, behind the false wall. Find what I hid. Find the truth before they destroy it." "Wait. Who are you?" But the woman was gone, dissolved into shadows, and Sarah woke gasping in her bed, her heart pounding against her ribs. 3 a.m. The apartment was dark and silent. "Just a dream," Sarah whispered. "Just a stupid dream." But her hand was shaking as she reached for the glass of water on her nightstand. And somewhere in the darkness she could have sworn she heard a woman's voice whisper, "Find it, before it's too late." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the mansion an hour early. She told herself it was because she wanted to finish the job quickly. Told herself the dream meant nothing. Old houses sparked the imagination. That was all. But her feet carried her straight to the 3rd floor, to the servants' quarters she hadn't explored yet. The rooms up here were smaller, plainer. Narrow beds, simple furniture, no family portraits or expensive decorations. In the last room at the end of the hall, Sarah found something that made her heart stop. The wallpaper was peeling away from one wall, revealing older layers beneath. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was the seam. A line where the wallpaper pattern didn't quite match. An alignment that was off by half an inch. So subtle, she almost missed it. Sarah ran her hand along the seam and felt her breath catch. There was a gap behind the paper, a space that shouldn't exist. Her dream came flooding back. The woman at the desk. The desperate words. "Look in the attic, behind the wall, behind the false wall." "That's insane," Sarah said out loud. "Dreams don't mean anything." But her hands were already pulling at the wallpaper, tearing it away in long strips. And beneath it, painted to blend with the wall but not quite succeeding, was the outline of a door. Sarah stood there for a long time staring. She should call Eleanor. That's what the attorney had said. "If you find anything unusual, contact me immediately." But Eleanor worked for whoever owned this estate. And if someone had hidden a door, hidden it carefully, hidden it decades ago, then maybe they didn't want it found. Maybe Eleanor didn't want it found either. Sarah thought about her eviction notice, her empty bank account, her baby due in 8 weeks. She thought about the woman in her dream begging her to find the truth. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's see what you're hiding." She found a crowbar in the gardening shed and went back upstairs. The hidden door came open with a shriek of rusty hinges. Behind it, narrow stairs climbed into darkness. Sarah hesitated at the bottom, her phone flashlight cutting a beam through the shadows. Every horror movie she'd ever seen told her this was a terrible idea. Pregnant woman, alone, abandoned house, secret staircase. This was exactly how people got killed. But her baby kicked hard like she was urging her mother forward. "If something bad happens," Sarah muttered, "I'm blaming you for the rest of your life." She started climbing. The attic air was thick and stale, undisturbed for decades. Dust motes swirled in Sarah's flashlight beam like tiny ghosts. The ceiling sloped so low she had to duck her belly, making movement awkward. Old furniture draped in sheets. Wooden crates stacked against walls. Trunks and boxes everywhere, creating narrow pathways through the accumulated possessions of a century. Sarah worked her way through, slowly checking each container. Moth-eaten clothes, crumbling books, dishes wrapped in newspaper that had turned yellow and brittle. She was about to give up when her light caught something wrong. Along the far wall, the wooden planks looked different, newer. The grain didn't match the rest of the attic's aged timber. Someone had built a false wall. Sarah crawled closer, her back screaming in protest, her belly scraping against dusty floorboards. She ran her fingers along the seam where new wood met old. This wasn't sloppy construction. This was deliberate concealment. Someone had gone to considerable effort to hide something here. Using the crowbar, Sarah pried away the boards. Behind them was a shallow space, maybe 2 feet deep, and in that space, perfectly centered, sat a single trunk. Dark leather with brass fittings turned green with age. An ornate letter W embossed on the lid. Sarah's hands were shaking as she pulled it toward her. The lock was old brass. None of Eleanor's keys fit. She should stop. She should call the attorney. She should let someone else decide what to do with whatever was inside. But Sarah thought about her dream, about the woman begging her to find the truth, about the desperation in those ghostly eyes. She broke the lock with the crowbar. The trunk opened with a creak of ancient hinges. Inside, the smell of old paper and lavender rose up. Someone had packed sachets to preserve the contents. Sarah's flashlight revealed stacks of documents carefully arranged. On top lay a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with that same elegant W. She opened to the first page. The Private Journal of Abigail Whitmore, 1918. I write this knowing that if it is ever found, I may already be dead, but the truth must survive even if I cannot. My husband William has discovered that his business partner Charles Garrison has been stealing from us. The evidence is overwhelming. Forged documents, transferred assets, a systematic theft of everything William built with his own hands. William confronted Charles yesterday. Their argument was terrible to hear. Charles said things that frightened me. He said William had no idea what he was capable of. He said some men would do anything to protect what they had taken. Tonight, William is very ill. He blames it on the influenza that has been ravaging the city. But I saw Charles leaving William's room this evening. I saw the vial he tried to hide in his pocket. I am afraid. If something happens to my husband, if something happens to me, let this journal be my testimony. Let it speak the truth when I no longer can. Charles Garrison is a thief, and I believe he means to be a murderer. Sarah sat back, her heart slamming against her ribs. This wasn't just old papers. This was evidence of murder, evidence that had been hidden for over a century. And suddenly, she understood why the woman in her dream had been so afraid. Sarah read through the night, She brought the trunk home, unable to leave it in the mansion, unable to let it out of her sight. She spread the documents across her kitchen table and worked through them by lamplight, page by page, revelation by revelation. The story that emerged was horrifying. William Whitmore had been one of Hartford's most successful textile manufacturers, a self-made man who'd built an empire from nothing. He'd trusted Charles Garrison, his college friend, enough to make him a full partner. That trust had destroyed him. The documents showed everything. Forged signatures on contracts. Fraudulent loans taken in William's name. Assets transferred to shell companies controlled by Garrison. A systematic theft executed with surgical precision while William was distracted by war work and illness. And then there were Abigail's letters. Dozens of them, copies she'd kept of correspondence to lawyers, police officers, newspaper editors. Each one carefully explained her suspicions. Each one begged for investigation. Each response was the same. Mrs. Whitmore, we appreciate your concerns, but Mr. Garrison is a respected member of our community. Without concrete evidence, we cannot pursue such serious accusations. Mrs. Whitmore, grief affects us all differently. Perhaps you should speak with a physician about your distress. Mrs. Whitmore, we must advise you that continued harassment of Mr. Garrison could result in legal action against you. Sarah felt rage building with every letter she read. Abigail had been right. She'd known the truth. She'd documented everything. And no one had believed her. No one had helped her. Because she was a woman. Because she was a widow. Because she didn't have power or money or connections. Because the world had decided her voice didn't matter. The final entries in Abigail's journal were dated 1920. I have hidden this trunk where Charles will never find it. I have documented everything I know. Everything I suspect. Everything I fear. My daughter Elizabeth is only 2 years old. If something happens to me, she will be raised by Charles's people. They will lie to her about her parents. They will erase our family from history. But someday someone will find what I have hidden. Someday someone will care enough to look. Someday the truth will matter. I have to believe that. If I don't, I cannot go on. Abigail Whitmore had died in 1920. Sarah found the death certificate in the trunk. Heart failure. She was 34 years old, the same age as Sarah. The same age dying alone. Her truth buried her daughter, stolen everything she loved, destroyed. By a man who smiled at her across dinner tables and called her dear friend. Sarah pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her baby move. I found it, Abigail, she whispered to the empty apartment. 100 years later, but I found it. Now she just had to figure out what to do with it. The answer came sooner than she expected. At 8 a.m., Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Mitchell? A woman's voice, strong and clear, with an undertone of barely contained emotion. My name is Margaret Chen. I believe you found something that belongs to my family. Sarah's blood ran cold. How did you get this number? I'm not your enemy, Mrs. Mitchell, quite the opposite. A pause. Abigail Whitmore was my grandmother. I've spent my entire life wondering what really happened to her, and now finally I might have answers. I don't understand. How do you know what I found? Because I've been watching that house for 50 years, waiting for someone to discover the truth. My grandmother hid there. Margaret's voice cracked. I just never expected it would be a pregnant cleaning woman with nothing to lose. Sarah sank into a chair, her mind racing. You're Abigail's granddaughter. Her great-granddaughter. My mother was Elizabeth Whitmore, the baby Abigail wrote about in her journal. Elizabeth was raised by Charles Garrison's people after Abigail died. They told her she was an orphan, a charity case. They made sure she never knew the truth about her family. How did you find out? My mother always knew something was wrong. She spent her whole life feeling like pieces were missing. Before she died, she told me to watch the mansion. She said if there was any truth left about our family, it would be hidden there. Sarah looked at the trunk, at the scattered documents at Abigail's journal, lying open on the table. I found it, she said. I found everything. Silence on the other end. Then very quietly, can you send me what you have? Sarah hesitated. How do I know I can trust you? You don't. But Mrs. Mitchell, if what you found proves what I think it proves, then my family has been living with a lie for 100 years. A lie that cost us everything. Our fortune, our home, our identity. Margaret's voice hardened. And the people who stole all of that are still out there. Still wealthy, still powerful, still protected by the same money they took from us. Who? The Garrison Pierce family. Have you heard of them? Sarah felt ice spreading through her veins. Everyone in Hartford has heard of them. Arthur Garrison Pierce is Charles Garrison's great-grandson. He controls real estate worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Money that should have belonged to my family. Money built on theft and murder. You think they know about the trunk? I think they've spent a century making sure no one ever finds out what Charles Garrison did. And I think if they discover you have evidence that could expose them, they will do whatever it takes to silence you. Sarah's hand went to her belly. Her baby kicked as if in warning. What do I do? Send me everything. I'm flying to Hartford tonight. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Margaret paused. And Mrs. Mitchell, don't go back to that mansion. Don't talk to the attorney who hired you, and don't trust anyone. You're asking me to trust you. I know, and I know you have no reason to, but I've waited my whole life for this moment, for someone to find what my grandmother hid, for the truth to finally matter. Margaret's voice dropped. Please, don't let them bury it again. After the call ended, Sarah sat in silence for a long time. Then she started photographing every document in the trunk. Whatever happened next, she was going to make sure the truth survived. Even if she didn't, the black SUV appeared on her street that afternoon. Sarah noticed it when she went out to check her mail. A dark vehicle with tinted windows parked across the street, engine running. She couldn't see the driver through the glass, but she could feel eyes watching her. She hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. Through her window, the SUV sat motionless, waiting, watching. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know what you found. Return it and walk away. This is your only warning. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? Someone sent me a scary text. There's a car parked on my street. She thought about calling Margaret Chen, but Margaret was still in San Francisco. She couldn't help not from 3,000 miles away. She thought about running, packing a bag and disappearing, starting over somewhere new. But she had $47 in her bank account. She was 7 months pregnant. She had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. And she had a trunk full of evidence that powerful people wanted to destroy. Sarah pulled up the photographs she'd taken and started uploading them to cloud storage. Then she created email drafts with copies attached scheduled to send automatically if she didn't check in every 12 hours. Insurance. That's what she needed. Proof that destroying her wouldn't destroy the truth. Outside, the black SUV sat silent and still. Waiting. Just before midnight, someone knocked on Sarah's door. She was still awake, too wired to sleep, watching the SUV through a crack in her curtains. It hadn't moved in hours. The knock made her jump so hard she knocked over her water glass. Who is it? She called, trying to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Mitchell, it's Eleanor Crane. Sarah's heart stopped. It's midnight, she said through the door. What are you doing here? I need to speak with you. It's urgent. About what? A pause. About what you found in the attic. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She'd been careful. She hadn't told anyone about the hidden door, the stairs. This was the trunk. How did Eleanor know? I don't know what you're talking about. Please, Mrs. Mitchell, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to help. Help how? Open the door and I'll explain. I promise you're in no danger from me. Sarah stood frozen, her hand hovering over the deadbolt. Every instinct screamed at her not to open that door. Eleanor worked for whoever owned the estate. Eleanor was connected to whatever conspiracy had kept Abigail's truth buried for a century. But what if Eleanor was telling the truth? What if she really could help? And what if the people in the black SUV were getting impatient? Sarah opened the door. Eleanor Crane stood in the hallway looking older and more tired than she had at the mansion. Her expensive suit was wrinkled. Her careful composure had cracked. May I come in? Sarah stepped aside, keeping her hand near her phone. Talk fast. Eleanor entered, glancing around the small apartment. Her eyes landed on the kitchen table on the trunk sitting there in plain sight on the scattered documents. You found it, she breathed. After all this time, you actually found it. How did you know? Because I've been looking for it my whole career. Eleanor turned to face her. My grandmother was Ruth Henderson. She was Abigail Whitmore's lady's maid. She was there the night William Whitmore died. She saw everything. Sarah felt the room tilt. Your grandmother. She spent her entire life consumed by guilt. She knew what Charles Garrison had done. She knew Abigail was telling the truth. But she was too afraid to speak up. Too afraid of what Garrison would do to her if she talked. Eleanor's voice cracked. When she died, she left me a letter. She told me about the trunk Abigail had hidden. She told me that if I ever found it, I had to make sure the truth came out. That was her dying wish, her attempt at atonement. Is that why you hired me to find it? I hired dozens of people over the years. Sent them into that house looking for secret compartments, hidden rooms, anything that might contain what Abigail hid. No one ever found it. Eleanor almost smiled. Until you. What do you want? I want to help you. I know people, journalists, lawyers, people who can make sure this story gets told, gets believed, gets acted upon. And what do you get out of it? Peace. Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears. My grandmother died believing she'd failed Abigail, failed to protect her, failed to speak up when it mattered. If I can help expose the truth now, maybe I can finally forgive her. Maybe I can finally forgive myself for waiting so long. Sarah studied the older woman's face, looking for signs of deception. All she saw was exhaustion and desperate hope. There are people watching my building, Sarah said. A black SUV. They sent me a threatening text. Eleanor nodded grimly. The Garrison Pierce family has eyes everywhere. They've been paranoid about that mansion for decades. If they know you found something, they'll do whatever it takes to get it back. What am I supposed to do? Get out. Tonight. Take the documents somewhere safe. I have a cabin in Vermont completely off the grid. You can stay there until we figure out our next move. I can't just leave. I'm meeting someone tomorrow. A woman named Margaret Chen. Eleanor's face went white. Abigail's great-granddaughter. You know her. I know of her. I've been trying to contact her for years, but she never responds. She doesn't trust anyone connected to Hartford. Can't blame her. Eleanor grabbed Sarah's arm. If Margaret Chen is coming here, if you've actually made contact with the Whitmore heir, then this is bigger than I ever imagined. This could actually work. What could work? Justice, Mrs. Mitchell. After 100 years, actual justice. Outside, an engine revved. Sarah and Eleanor both turned toward the window. The black SUV was moving, pulling away from the curb, driving slowly down the street. They're leaving, Sarah said. No, Eleanor's voice was tight with fear. They're not leaving. They're repositioning. What does that mean? It means they're done watching. Eleanor turned to face her. They're coming for you. Sarah's phone buzzed, another text from an unknown number. Final warning. Return what you stole or face the consequences. You have 1 hour. Eleanor read the message over her shoulder. We need to leave. Now. I can't just... Mrs. Mitchell. Eleanor grabbed both of Sarah's hands, her grip surprisingly strong. I have spent 40 years of my life trying to make up for my grandmother's silence. I have searched that house 100 times looking for what you found in 1 week. I am not going to let them bury this again. I am not going to let them hurt you. Sarah looked at the trunk, at the documents, at her own swollen belly. She thought about David, about the way the insurance company had found loopholes to avoid paying her, about all the powerful people who had decided her truth didn't matter. She thought about Abigail Whitmore, 34 years old, dying alone with her secrets. Give me 10 minutes to pack. Eleanor nodded. I'll pull my car around back. Take only what you can't live without. Leave everything else. Sarah moved through her apartment like a woman in a dream. She grabbed closed toiletries, the few photographs she had of David. She took the trunk, carefully packed the documents back inside, and she took one more thing. David's wedding ring. She'd kept it in a box by her bed since the funeral. Couldn't bear to look at it. Couldn't bear to throw it away. Now she slipped it onto a chain around her neck, feeling the metal warm against her skin. Okay, baby girl, she whispered to her daughter. Let's go find out who we're up against. She didn't know that in less than 48 hours she'd be standing on the steps of Hartford's courthouse facing one of the most powerful families in Connecticut. She didn't know that the truth Abigail had hidden would shake the foundations of a century-old empire. She didn't know that her own life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. All she knew was that she was done being afraid, done being silent, done waiting for someone else to save her. Sarah Mitchell walked out of her apartment with a trunk full of secrets and a baby kicking in her belly. Behind her, the black SUV rounded the corner headlights, cutting through the darkness. Ahead of her, Eleanor's car waited with the engine running. And somewhere in the night, the ghosts of Abigail and William Whitmore watched their truth finally begin its journey toward the light. Eleanor's car shot through the darkness like a bullet. Sarah gripped the door handle with white knuckles, her other hand pressed against her belly. Behind them, headlights appeared, the black SUV closing fast. They're following us, Sarah said. I know. Eleanor's jaw was tight. Hold on. She yanked the wheel hard right, sending the car down a narrow side street. Sarah's shoulder slammed against the window. Her baby kicked frantically, responding to the surge of adrenaline flooding Sarah's bloodstream. Where are we going? Somewhere they won't expect. Eleanor made another sharp turn, then another. The headlights behind them flickered and disappeared. Did we lose them? For now? Eleanor didn't slow down. They'll have people at your apartment, at the mansion, at every obvious location. We need somewhere off their radar. The cabin you mentioned, too far. We need somewhere tonight. Eleanor pulled out her phone, dialing one-handed. Diana, it's Eleanor. I need your place. Now, no questions. Sarah couldn't hear the response, but Eleanor nodded grimly. 20 minutes. We'll be there. She hung up and pushed the accelerator harder. Who's Diana? Someone who owes me. Someone the Garrison Pierce family doesn't know about. Eleanor glanced at Sarah. You're doing well. Most people would be falling apart right now. I fell apart 6 months ago when my husband died. I don't have any falling apart left. Eleanor almost smiled. Good. You're going to need that strength. They drove in silence for another 15 minutes, winding through neighborhoods Sarah didn't recognize. Finally, Eleanor pulled into the driveway of a small house with a for sale sign in the yard. This is it. Diana's a real estate agent. She has access to empty properties all over the city. Eleanor killed the engine. No one lives here. No one's watching it. We can stay until morning. Sarah grabbed the trunk from the back seat and followed Eleanor inside. The house was empty except for basic staging furniture. Cold, impersonal, but it felt safer than anywhere Sarah had been in days. Get some rest, Eleanor said. Tomorrow is going to be difficult. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow we meet Margaret Chen. Tomorrow we start building a case that will take down the most powerful family in Hartford. Eleanor's eyes were hard. Tomorrow we go to war. Sarah didn't sleep. She sat on a dusty couch with the trunk at her feet, reading through Abigail's journal for the 20th time. Each entry revealed new details she'd missed before. Small observations, careful documentation, the meticulous work of a woman who knew she might not survive but was determined to leave a record. At 6:47 a.m. her phone buzzed. Margaret Chen. Mrs. Mitchell, I just landed. Where are you? Sarah gave her the address Eleanor had provided. How soon can you be here? 30 minutes, maybe less. Margaret paused. Is Eleanor Crane with you? Yes, she helped me escape last night. The Garrison Pierce people were watching my apartment. A long silence. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to be very careful. I've spent decades researching what happened to my family. I know who the players are, and I know that some of them are very good at pretending to be on your side. Sarah looked at Eleanor, who was making coffee in the kitchen. What are you saying? I'm saying that everyone connected to this case has an agenda. Some of them want justice. Some of them want to protect the status quo, and some of them want to control how much of the truth actually comes out. You don't trust Eleanor. I don't trust anyone I haven't looked in the eye. I'll reserve judgment until I meet her. Margaret's voice softened. But I trust you, Sarah. You found what my grandmother hid. You could have destroyed it or sold it or turned it over to people who would have buried it forever. Instead, you reached out to me. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. After the call ended, Sarah sat very still, thinking about what Margaret had said. Everyone has an agenda. What was Eleanor's at 7:23 a.m.? A rental car pulled into the driveway. Margaret Chen emerged from the driver's side. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the intensity in her eyes, the determination in her posture. A man climbed out of the passenger side. Younger, maybe mid-40s, with a camera bag slung over his shoulder. That's my son Daniel, Margaret said as they approached the door. He's a documentary filmmaker. I hope you don't mind that I brought him. Why would I mind? Because Daniel has cameras, and once he starts filming, there's no going back. This story will be documented. Every revelation, every confrontation, every moment of triumph or defeat. Margaret's gaze was steady. Are you prepared for that? Sarah thought about her empty bank account, her eviction notice, her baby due in 8 weeks. I'm prepared for whatever it takes. Margaret nodded slowly. Good. Then let's begin. The next 4 hours were the most intense of Sarah's life. Margaret went through the trunk's contents with the precision of the attorney she'd once been. She examined each document, asked questions about where and how Sarah had found them, made notes in a legal pad that filled with dense handwriting. Daniel filmed everything. The documents, the trunk, Sarah's face as she described discovering the hidden door, Eleanor's face as she talked about her grandmother Ruth and the guilt that had consumed her entire life. This is extraordinary, Margaret said at 11:15 a.m., holding up a stack of papers. These are the original transfer documents showing how Charles Garrison moved assets out of Whitmore Manufacturing. Look at the signatures. She spread 3 documents across the table. This is William Whitmore's genuine signature from a contract signed in 1915, and this is the signature on the transfer documents from 1918. Margaret pointed to the subtle differences. They're close, but they're not the same. Charles Garrison forged these. Can you prove that? Sarah asked. With modern forensic analysis, absolutely. Handwriting experts can demonstrate forgery with near certainty. Margaret's eyes gleamed. This alone would be enough to establish fraud, but combined with Abigail's journal entries, the letters documenting her attempts to seek help, and the circumstantial evidence around William's death. We have a case, Daniel said. We have the beginning of a case. Margaret set down the documents. What we need now is to connect this to the present day, to show that the Garrison Pierce family has been knowingly benefiting from stolen assets for over a century. Eleanor spoke up for the first time in an hour. I can help with that. Everyone turned to look at her. What do you mean? Margaret's voice was carefully neutral. I told you my grandmother was Abigail's lady's maid. What I didn't tell you is that my family has maintained connections to the Garrison household ever since. Not because we wanted to, but because Charles Garrison made sure of it. Eleanor's hands were shaking. He knew my grandmother had witnessed things. He knew she could have testified against him, so he kept her close, gave her family jobs, made sure we were dependent on Garrison money, Garrison connections, Garrison goodwill. You're saying you worked for them. I'm saying I was their lawyer for 15 years. Eleanor's voice cracked. I handled the trust that controlled the Whitmore mansion. I knew there was something wrong with how that property was being managed. I asked questions, tried to dig into the original paperwork. What happened? Arthur Garrison Pierce called me into his office. He sat me down and explained very calmly, very clearly, that my grandmother had made certain choices during her lifetime, choices that had protected her family. He suggested that I should make similar choices if I wanted to keep protecting mine. He threatened you. He didn't have to threaten. He just reminded me of the truth. Eleanor looked at Sarah. My entire career, my reputation, my family's security, all of it was built on Garrison money. Money that was stolen from the Whitmores. I've known that my whole life, and until now I was too afraid to do anything about it. What changed? Margaret asked. Sarah changed. Eleanor gestured at the pregnant woman sitting across from her. She found what I've been looking for 40 years. She had nothing to gain by pursuing this and everything to lose, and she did it anyway. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. I'm done being afraid. I'm done protecting people who built their empire on murder. Whatever I know, whatever I can contribute, it's yours. Margaret studied Eleanor for a long moment. Then she nodded. Tell us everything. At 2:34 p.m., Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. She showed it to Margaret, who nodded. Answer it. Put it on speaker. Sarah accepted the call. Mrs. Mitchell. A man's voice, smooth and cultured with an undertone of absolute control. My name is Arthur Garrison Pierce. I believe we should talk. Margaret's expression went hard as stone. Daniel immediately began recording. We're talking, Sarah said. Not over the phone, in person. I think we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone. What kind of arrangement? The kind where you receive substantial compensation for the historical artifacts you've discovered, and I ensure that you and your baby have a secure future. The kind where everyone walks away satisfied. And if I'm not interested in compensation... A pause. When Arthur spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth. Then I should tell you that my lawyers have drafted a complaint alleging theft of property from an estate under my family's control. Filing that complaint would result in criminal charges. A pregnant woman in prison, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm sure you can imagine how difficult that would be for your child. Sarah's hand went to her belly. Her baby kicked hard. You're threatening me. I'm presenting options. You have something I want. I have the power to make your life very easy or very difficult. The choice is yours. Margaret leaned forward, unable to stay silent any longer. Arthur, this is Margaret Chen. Silence on the other end. Then very quietly, the Whitmore heir. That's right, and I have to tell you, your grandfather would be ashamed of how sloppy you've become. Threatening a pregnant woman over the phone, recording devices are so much better than they were in 1918. More silence. Sarah could almost hear Arthur recalculating. Mrs. Chen, I had hoped to avoid involving you in this. I've been involved since my grandmother was murdered by your grandfather. I've been involved since my mother was stolen from her family and raised to believe she was worthless. I've been involved my entire life, Arthur. You just didn't know it. Whatever you think you know. I know everything. I have documentation proving Charles Garrison forged documents to steal the Whitmore fortune. I have journal entries from my grandmother describing how your grandfather visited her husband's sick room with a vial of poison. I have letters proving that the Hartford establishment covered up murder to protect one of their own, Margaret's voice was ice. "And in approximately 48 hours, I'm going to hold a press conference on the steps of the Hartford courthouse. I'm going to present this evidence to every major news outlet in Connecticut, and I'm going to watch your family's century of lies come crashing down around your ears." Arthur's response was barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what you're starting." "No, Arthur, you have no idea what you started when your grandfather decided to become a thief and a murderer." Margaret smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm just finishing it." She nodded at Sarah, who ended the call. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel lowered his camera and let out a breath he'd been holding. "Holy shit." Margaret allowed herself a small smile. "Language, Daniel. We're building a legal case, not a documentary about sailors." "Mom, you just declared war on one of the most powerful families in Connecticut." "I declared war on them 50 years ago. They're just finding out about it now." She turned to Sarah and Eleanor. "We have 48 hours. Arthur will use every resource at his disposal to stop us. He'll try legal maneuvers, intimidation, bribery. He may try things that are considerably less legal." "What do we do?" Sarah asked. "We prepare. We document everything. We create copies of every piece of evidence and distribute them to people Arthur can't reach." Margaret's eyes were bright with something that might have been joy. "And we trust that my grandmother's courage wasn't wasted, that hiding that trunk believing someone would eventually find it was worth everything she sacrificed." Sarah looked at the documents spread across the table, at Eleanor finally free of the secret that had haunted her family for generations, at Daniel with his camera ready to record history, at her own swollen belly where her daughter waited to be born into whatever world they were about to create. "Let's get to work," she said. The next 36 hours were a blur of activity. Margaret called in every favor she'd accumulated during her decades as a civil rights attorney. Forensic document experts arrived to examine the forged signatures. Historians came to provide context about the 1918 flu pandemic and the social conditions that had allowed Charles Garrison to escape justice. Lawyers reviewed the evidence and began drafting legal complaints. Eleanor provided crucial insider information, account numbers, property records, the names of people who had helped maintain the cover-up over the generations. Daniel filmed everything, building a documentary record that would survive whatever happened next. And Sarah, despite her pregnancy, despite her exhaustion, despite the fear that never quite went away, worked alongside them. She organized documents. She answered questions about where she'd found each piece of evidence. She told her story again and again to lawyers and journalists and historians until she could recite it in her sleep. At 11:47 p.m. on the second night, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You need to see this." Sarah opened her email and found a message with no subject line and no text, just an attachment, a photograph. She opened it and felt her blood turn to ice. The image showed her apartment building, her window, and in the window, visible through a telephoto lens, the shadow of her silhouette. Below the photograph, a single line of text: "We know where you live, we know where you sleep, we know you're pregnant. Think very carefully about your next move." Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she dropped the phone. Margaret picked it up, looked at the image, and her expression hardened into something terrifying. "Daniel, get this to the cybersecurity team. I want to know where it came from." "Mom, if they're watching her apartment, they're trying to scare her. That's all they have left." Margaret turned to Sarah, her voice softening. "They wouldn't send threats if they had anything better. This is desperation." "It doesn't feel like desperation." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "It feels like they're going to kill me." Margaret took both of Sarah's hands in hers. "Listen to me. My grandmother faced these same people. They threatened her. They isolated her. They destroyed her reputation and stole her daughter. And in the end, they killed her." Sarah flinched. "But they didn't win. They thought they won, but they didn't, because Abigail hid the truth. She believed that someday someone would find it, someone brave enough to bring it into the light." Margaret's grip tightened. "You're that someone, Sarah. After 100 years, you're the answer to my grandmother's prayer, and I will not let them hurt you. I will not let them win again." "How can you promise that because this time we're not alone? This time we have evidence. We have witnesses, we have cameras recording everything, and in less than 12 hours we're going to tell the whole world what the Garrison Pierce family did." Margaret released Sarah's hands and straightened up. "They can threaten all they want, but the truth is coming out, and there's nothing Arthur Garrison Pierce can do to stop it." At 6:15 a.m., Sarah woke to the sound of pounding on the door. She'd fallen asleep on the couch, too exhausted to move. Margaret was already up on the phone with someone. Daniel was reviewing footage on his laptop. Eleanor answered the door. 2 police officers stood on the threshold. "Eleanor Crane?" one of them asked. Yes? You're under arrest for theft of property and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Sarah watched in horror as they handcuffed Eleanor and led her toward a waiting patrol car. This is Arthur, Margaret said, her voice tight with fury. He's trying to disrupt us before the press conference. Can he do that? He can do anything he wants. He owns half the police force. Margaret was already dialing her phone. But this isn't going to stop us. Daniel called the backup legal team. We need to get Eleanor out on bail before... Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She looked at the screen and froze. It's the courthouse. They're calling about our permit for the press conference. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, and her face went pale. They revoked our permit, cited security concerns. We can't hold the press conference on the courthouse steps. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. What do we do, Pault? We find another venue. Another buzz? Another call? Margaret answered, listened, and closed her eyes. The hotel where we booked the overflow media room just canceled our reservation, also citing security concerns. As Sarah understood what was happening, Arthur Garrison Pierce was shutting down every avenue they had, using his money, his connections, his power to ensure their voices would never be heard. He's going to bury us, she said, just like he buried Abigail. Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then she opened her eyes, and something had changed in them. Something fierce and unbreakable. No, he's not. She turned to Daniel. Get your camera. We're going live. Live where? Everywhere. Social media, streaming platforms, every channel we can access. Margaret grabbed her phone. Arthur Garrison Pierce can control the police. He can control the courts. He can control the media. But he cannot control the internet. He cannot stop millions of people from watching. Mom, are you sure? I've been waiting my entire life for this moment. I'm not going to let it slip away because some rich criminal pulled a few strings. Margaret looked at Sarah. Are you ready? Sarah thought about Abigail, about Elizabeth, about her own daughter waiting to be born. I'm ready. Margaret nodded once. Then let's show the world what the Garrison Pierce family really is. At 9:00 a.m. exactly, Daniel pressed the button to go live. The stream started with Margaret sitting in front of a plain white wall, the trunk beside her. Daniel had set up lighting and a microphone. It wasn't professional studio quality, but it was clear enough. Within minutes, viewers started joining. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Margaret told the story from the beginning. The Whitmore family, Charles Garrison's betrayal, William's murder, Abigail's desperate attempt to preserve the truth. She showed documents, read from the journal, displayed photographs of the forged signatures side by side with authentic ones. At 9:23 a.m., the viewer count hit 50,000. At 9:41 a.m., it hit 100,000. Comments flooded the stream, questions, expressions of outrage, demands for justice. Then at 9:47 a.m., Sarah took Margaret's place in front of the camera. My name is Sarah Mitchell, she said. 6 months ago, my husband died in a construction accident. The insurance company refused to pay. I was 7 months pregnant, facing eviction with nowhere to turn. Her voice shook, but she kept going. I took a job cleaning out an old mansion. I found a trunk hidden in the attic, and I discovered that I wasn't the only woman who'd been abandoned by a system designed to protect the powerful. She held up Abigail's journal. Abigail Whitmore wrote this over 100 years ago. She knew her husband had been murdered. She knew who did it. She spent the last years of her life begging someone to listen, begging someone to believe her. No one did. Sarah looked directly into the camera. I'm listening now. I believe her now. And I'm asking everyone watching to believe her too. Because what happened to Abigail Whitmore isn't ancient history. It's still happening. Powerful people are still silencing women, still stealing from families, still getting away with murder. She placed her hand on her belly. My daughter is going to be born in 8 weeks. I want her to grow up in a world where the truth matters, where courage means something, where you can't buy your way out of justice. Sarah's voice hardened. Arthur Garrison Pierce has threatened me. He's had me followed. He's tried to have me arrested. He revoked our permit for a public press conference because he didn't want anyone to hear what I'm saying right now. She leaned closer to the camera. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not going to be silent. I'm going to keep talking until everyone knows what the Garrison Pierce family did, and I'm going to keep fighting until my grandmother gets the justice she deserved 100 years ago. Sarah paused, realizing what she'd said. My grandmother. She wasn't related to Abigail Whitmore, not by blood, but in that moment sitting in front of a camera, fighting for truth against overwhelming power, she felt the connection, felt the bond between women across generations who refused to be silenced. Margaret touched her shoulder gently. The viewer count had hit 500,000. At 10:15 a.m., the first mainstream news outlet picked up the story. By 10:30 a.m., it was everywhere. Sarah watched in amazement as her face appeared on television screens across the country, as pundits debated the legitimacy of the documents, as legal experts weighed in on whether criminal charges could be filed after a century. Arthur Garrison Pierce released a statement through his lawyers calling the accusations baseless and defamatory. He threatened legal action against everyone involved. No one cared. The story had taken on a life of its own. A pregnant widow, a century-old murder, a powerful family's dark secret exposed. It was the kind of narrative that captured imaginations, that spread across social media like wildfire, that couldn't be controlled or contained or suppressed. At 11:03 a.m., Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number, again. She answered. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Arthur's voice had lost its smoothness. Now it was raw, desperate. "This has gone far enough. You need to stop this before it destroys everyone involved. Including you. Including you. Do you have any idea what my lawyers can do to you? The defamation suits alone will bankrupt you for the rest of your life. Your daughter will be paying off my legal judgments until she's 50. Your grandfather murdered 2 people. Your family has been lying about it for 100 years, and you're threatening to sue me." "I'm trying to save you from yourself." Arthur's voice cracked. "You think you're some kind of hero, you're not. You're a pregnant woman with nothing who stumbled onto something she doesn't understand. And now you're going to destroy yourself." Sarah looked at Margaret, who was watching with calm intensity, at Daniel still filming, at the viewer count which had passed 1 million. "Your grandfather thought he could silence Abigail Whitmore," Sarah said. "He was wrong. She found a way to speak from beyond the grave, and now I'm speaking for her. This isn't over." "You're right. It's just beginning." She hung up. At 11:47 a.m., the Hartford Police Department announced they were opening an investigation into the historical allegations against the Garrison family. At 12:15 p.m., the Connecticut Attorney General's office released a statement expressing serious concern about the evidence presented in the live stream. At 12:33 p.m., 3 members of the Garrison Pierce Foundation's board resigned, citing personal reasons. At 1:00 p.m. exactly, Eleanor Crane was released on bail. She walked out of the police station to find Margaret, Daniel, and Sarah waiting for her. "They dropped most of the charges," Eleanor said, looking dazed. "The prosecutor told me the whole case was falling apart, said there was no way to get a conviction when the whole country was watching." Margaret hugged her. "Welcome back." "Did I miss anything?" "Just the complete destruction of the Garrison Pierce family's reputation." Margaret smiled grimly. "But the hard part is still ahead." "What do you mean? Yet public opinion isn't justice. Arthur still has his money, his lawyers, his connections. If we want real accountability, we need the courts to act, and that could take years." Sarah felt exhaustion washing over her. The adrenaline that had kept her going was finally fading. "Years," she repeated. "I don't have years. I have 8 weeks until my daughter is born. I have an eviction notice. I have $47 in my bank account." Margaret turned to face her. "Sarah, whatever happens next, you're not facing it alone. My family owes everything we might recover to you, and I'm going to make sure you're taken care of." "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity. This is justice." Margaret's voice was firm. "My grandmother's estate was worth millions. If we can establish that it was stolen through fraud, the Whitmore heirs, which now includes my family, will have a legitimate claim to compensation, and you as the person who discovered the evidence will have a significant finder's fee." "How significant?" Margaret told her the number. Sarah's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Eleanor hadn't caught her. That's enough to raise your daughter without worrying about eviction notices, enough to buy a house, enough to have a future." Margaret smiled. "Enough to make everything you've been through worth it." Sarah started crying, not from sadness, not from fear, from something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. At 3:15 p.m., Sarah's phone rang one more time. She almost didn't answer. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, ready to collapse. But something made her pick up. "Mrs. Mitchell." A woman's voice, old and trembling. "My name is Ruth Henderson, Eleanor Crane's grandmother." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Eleanor's grandmother died years ago. I know you think I'm dead. Everyone thinks I'm dead." The voice cracked with emotion. "But I'm not. I've been hiding for almost 20 years. Hiding from the Garrison family. Hiding from what I know." "What are you talking about?" "I was there the night William Whitmore died. I saw Charles Garrison leave his room. I saw the vial. I know what he did. Sarah gripped the phone so hard her knuckles went white. Why are you calling me now? Because I watched your live stream. I saw what you did, and I decided that I can't keep hiding anymore. I can't let Abigail's granddaughter fight alone when I have the truth that could end this once and for all. What truth? A long pause.
Kami kriminal.
I know where Charles Garrison hid the rest of the evidence that proves he murdered William Whitmore, the evidence he kept as insurance against anyone who might try to expose him. Sarah's heart stopped. Where? I'll tell you, but not over the phone. We need to meet, tonight, before the Garrison family realizes I'm still alive and comes to silence me for good. The line went dead. Sarah stood there, holding her phone, feeling the weight of everything that had happened and everything still to come. Ruth Henderson was alive. There was more evidence. And somewhere out there, Arthur Garrison Pierce was planning his next move. She touched her belly, feeling her daughter kick. Hold on, baby girl, she whispered. This isn't over yet. Sarah stared at her phone for a full minute after the call ended. Ruth Henderson was alive. Eleanor's grandmother, the woman everyone thought had died, 20 years ago was alive and claiming to have evidence that could destroy the Garrison Pierce family forever. It had to be a trap. Sarah, Margaret's voice cut through her shock. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. I think I just talked to one. She told them everything. The phone call, Ruth's claim about witnessing William Whitmore's murder, the hidden evidence, the demand to meet tonight. Eleanor went pale. That's impossible. My grandmother died in 2005. I was at her funeral. I watched them lower her casket into the ground. She says she's been hiding, that she faked her death to escape the Garrison family? That's insane. Why would she? How could she? Eleanor's hands were shaking. I grieved for her. For 20 years I grieved for her. Margaret stepped forward, her expression calculating. Eleanor, think carefully. Was there anything strange about your grandmother's death? Anything that didn't quite add up? Eleanor closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember. She died of a heart attack, alone in her apartment. The casket was closed at the funeral. They said the embalming hadn't gone well. Did you see her body? A long silence. No, Eleanor whispered. No, I never saw her body. Daniel lowered his camera. So it's possible she could have faked the whole thing. But why call... Eleanor's voice cracked with emotion. Why would she let me believe she was dead? Why would she put me through that because she was afraid? Sarah understood fear. She'd lived with it for months. She was afraid that if she stayed, the Garrison family would kill her for real, and maybe she was afraid that if she told you the truth, you'd be in danger too. Eleanor sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Margaret checked her watch. It was 3:47 p.m. We need to decide what to do. If Ruth Henderson is really alive, and if she really has evidence, this changes everything. But it could also be a trap set by Arthur Garrison Pierce to lure us into a vulnerable position. How do we find out? Sarah asked. We meet her, but we do it smart. Margaret turned to Daniel. Can you set up surveillance equipment, hidden cameras, audio recording? Already thinking about it. Good. We'll choose the location, somewhere public enough that they can't try anything but private enough that Ruth feels safe talking. Margaret pulled out her phone. I know a place. At 5:23 p.m., Sarah called the number Ruth had used. The old woman answered on the first ring. Mrs. Mitchell, have you decided? We'll meet you, but we choose where. A pause. That's reasonable. Where? St. Mary's Church on Prospect Street. The evening service ends at 7. We'll meet in the parish hall at 7:30. A church. Ruth's voice held a note of dark humor. Appropriate, I suppose. I have a lot to confess. Are you really Eleanor's grandmother? Yes, and I've been carrying a burden for over a century that I should have put down long ago. Tonight, I finally will. The line went dead. Sarah looked at Margaret. She agreed. Then we prepare. Daniel, get your equipment ready. Eleanor, I need you to hold yourself together. If this really is your grandmother, you're going to need to be strong. Eleanor nodded, wiping her eyes. I can do this. Sarah, Margaret's voice softened. You don't have to come. You're 7 months pregnant. You've already done more than anyone could have asked. Sarah touched her belly, feeling her daughter move. Abigail Whitmore was pregnant when her husband was murdered. She fought alone for years trying to get someone to listen. I'm not going to let her witness face this alone either. Margaret smiled. You really are remarkable, you know that. I'm just tired of being afraid." At 6:15 p.m., they left for the church. Daniel had packed a van with surveillance equipment, hidden cameras disguised as buttons, audio recorders small enough to fit in a pocket, a laptop set up to monitor everything in real time. Sarah rode in the back trying to rest but unable to sleep. Her mind kept racing through possibilities. What if Ruth was telling the truth? What if there was evidence that could prove murder beyond any doubt? What if this was finally the end of a 100-year nightmare, and what if it was all a trap? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I know where you're going. I know what you're planning. This ends tonight, one way or another." Sarah showed it to Margaret. "Arthur," Margaret said grimly. "He's monitoring our communications somehow. Should we abort? No. If he knows where we're going, running won't help. We need to finish this." Margaret's jaw tightened. "But we need to be ready for anything." They arrived at St. Mary's Church at 7:15 p.m. The evening service was still in progress. Through the stained glass windows, Sarah could see figures moving, could hear the faint sound of hymns. It seemed impossible that such peace existed in the same world as the chaos she'd been living through. Daniel went ahead to set up the surveillance equipment in the parish hall. Margaret made phone calls arranging for backup, alerting the lawyers, preparing for whatever came next. Eleanor sat beside Sarah on a bench outside the church, staring at nothing. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked. "No?" Eleanor's voice was hollow. "For 20 years I believed my grandmother was dead. I visited her grave every month. I talked to her headstone like she could hear me. And now she might be alive. Now she might have been alive this whole time, watching me struggle, watching me carry the guilt of our family's silence. And she never reached out, never let me know she was there." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. How could she do that? Sarah didn't have an answer. At 7:28 p.m., the church doors opened and parishioners began filing out. Sarah and Eleanor moved into the parish hall where Daniel had finished his preparations. The room was simple, functional, with folding chairs stacked against walls and a long table in the center. Margaret positioned herself near the door. Daniel set up in a corner camera, ready. At 7:33 p.m., the door opened. An old woman stepped inside. She was small, frail, with white hair and hands that trembled as she gripped a wooden cane. But her eyes were sharp, alert, taking in everything at once. Eleanor made a sound like she'd been punched. "Grandma," Ruth Henderson looked at her granddaughter, and tears began streaming down her weathered face. "Eleanor, my beautiful girl, I'm so sorry." Eleanor crossed the room in 3 steps and threw her arms around the old woman, sobbing. You were dead, I buried you." I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry for everything." Sarah watched the reunion with tears in her own eyes. Whatever happened next, this moment was real. This grief, this relief, this impossible second chance, it was all real. After several minutes, Eleanor pulled back, wiping her eyes. Why did you let me think you were dead?" Ruth lowered herself into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 93 years. "Because I was going to tell the truth. After all those years of silence, I was finally going to tell someone what I saw the night William Whitmore died. And Arthur Garrison Pierce found out." "How?" "I'd been keeping a journal, writing down everything I remembered. I thought if I died with the truth unspoken, it would be lost forever, so I wrote it all down." Ruth's voice shook. "Arthur's people broke into my apartment, they found the journal, and they made it very clear what would happen if I ever spoke. They threatened to kill you. They threatened to kill Eleanor." Ruth looked at her granddaughter with anguished eyes. "They said if I talked, if I went to the police or the press, they would make sure you suffered. I couldn't let that happen." "So you faked your death?" "A friend helped me, a doctor who owed me a favor. He signed a false death certificate. I disappeared. Started a new life in another state. For 20 years I've been living as someone else, watching from a distance, praying that someday the truth would come out without me." Ruth looked at Sarah. "And then you found Abigail's trunk. You did what I was too afraid to do. You brought the truth into the light." Sarah sat down across from the old woman. "You said you have evidence. Evidence Charles Garrison kept as insurance." "Yes." Ruth's eyes went distant, lost in memory. "After William died, Charles was paranoid. He knew Abigail suspected him. He knew she was gathering evidence trying to prove what he'd done. So he kept records. Detailed records of every crime he'd committed, every person he'd bribed, every threat he'd made. Why would he do that? Because he was surrounded by people who were complicit. The doctor who falsified William's death certificate. The lawyers who helped transfer the assets. The police officers who ignored Abigail's accusations. Charles kept evidence against all of them to ensure their silence. Margaret stepped forward. Where is this evidence now? In a safe deposit box at First National Bank, the same bank the Garrison family has used for a century. Ruth reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key. Charles gave this to my grandmother as insurance. If anything ever happened to him, she was supposed to retrieve the contents and destroy them, but she never did. Why not? Because she was afraid that someday justice might still be possible, so she kept the key hidden, passed it down through our family, and now I'm passing it to you? Ruth held out the key to Sarah. You found Abigail's truth. Now find Charles's. Sarah took the key. It was small, old cold in her palm. The bank will have records, Margaret said. They'll know this safe deposit box exists. If Arthur has connections there... He does, Ruth nodded. That's why you have to move fast. Tonight, if possible, before he realizes what we're doing. The bank is closed. I know someone who works there. Someone who owes my family a debt. Ruth smiled grimly. The Garrison family isn't the only one with connections. At 8:17 p.m. they arrived at First National Bank. The building was dark closed for the night, but a side door was propped open and a nervous-looking man in a security uniform was waiting for them. Mrs. Henderson, he whispered, you're really alive. Hello, Thomas. Thank you for doing this. If anyone finds out I let you in, they won't. We'll be quick. Thomas led them through darkened hallways to the vault room. Sarah's heart pounded with every step. This was illegal. Breaking into a bank accessing records without authorization. If they got caught, but they'd come too far to stop now. The vault door was massive, intimidating. Thomas punched in a code and the lock disengaged with a heavy clunk. Safe deposit boxes are in the back. I'll wait here. You have 15 minutes. Ruth led them through rows of metal boxes until she found the one she was looking for, number 847. She inserted the key and turned. The box slid open. Inside were stacks of documents yellowed with age, photographs, letters, and at the bottom a leather-bound ledger. Ruth lifted the ledger with trembling hands. This is it. Charles Garrison's private record of every crime he ever committed. Margaret took the ledger and began flipping through pages. Her face went pale. My God, it's all here. Names, dates, amounts. He paid the coroner $5,000 to falsify William's death certificate. He bribed 3 police officers to ignore Abigail's complaints. He paid a judge to dismiss her lawsuit. Is there anything about William's murder? Sarah asked. Margaret turned more pages, then she stopped drawing in a sharp breath. November 15, 1918. Administered final solution to WW. Problem eliminated. Cost of digitalis 47 cents. Cost of doctor's silence $3,000. Sarah felt sick. He wrote it down. He actually wrote down that he murdered William Whitmore. He wrote down everything. Margaret's voice was shaking. This isn't just evidence of one murder. This is evidence of decades of crime. Bribery, fraud, witness intimidation, and at least 3 other deaths that look suspicious. Other deaths. Abigail Whitmore, 1920, listed as health complication assisted. A newspaper editor in 1923 who was investigating the Whitmore case, accident arranged. Dummy. And a lawyer in 1931 who was trying to help Elizabeth reclaim her inheritance, problem resolved permanently. Eleanor covered her mouth. Charles Garrison was a serial killer. He was a monster. Ruth's voice was hollow. And my grandmother helped him. She helped him hide these records. She helped him maintain the illusion of respectability, and she passed that guilt down to me. Sarah looked at the ledger, at the cold, precise handwriting documenting decades of evil. This ends now, she said. This ends tonight. At 9:02 p.m. they emerged from the bank with the ledger and all supporting documents. Thomas locked the door behind them, looking relieved to see them go. What now? Sarah asked. Now we go public. Margaret was already on her phone. I'm calling every journalist who covered our live stream. I'm sending copies of these documents to every news outlet in the country. By morning, there won't be a person in America who doesn't know what Charles Garrison did. And Arthur. Arthur is going to prison, not for what his grandfather did, but for the cover-up, for the threats, for the witness intimidation. Margaret's eyes were hard. He's been protecting a murderer's legacy. Now he's going to pay for it. They drove back to the safe house, Daniel already uploading photographs of the documents to secure servers. Sarah sat in the back of the van, exhausted beyond words but unable to rest. In her lap, she held the key Ruth had given her. Such a small thing. Such enormous consequences. Her baby kicked hard as if reminding her mother that she was still there, still waiting, still counting on Sarah to build a better world for her to be born into. "Soon, baby girl," Sarah whispered. "This will all be over soon." At 9:34 p.m., Margaret's phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, and her face transformed. "What?" Eleanor asked. "What is it?" "The Hartford Police Department just issued an arrest warrant." Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. "For Arthur Garrison Pierce. Charges include conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness intimidation, and accessory after the fact to multiple homicides." "They're actually arresting him. The Attorney General saw our evidence. The ledger combined with everything else was enough to move forward immediately." Margaret laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "They're arresting him right now, at his home, on live television." Daniel pulled up the news on his laptop. Sarah watched as police cars surrounded a massive estate, as officers approached the front door, as Arthur Garrison Pierce, still in his evening clothes, was led out in handcuffs while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. "This is really happening," Sarah said. "After 100 years, this is really happening." Ruth Henderson was crying. "Abigail, William, Elizabeth, they can finally rest." Eleanor put her arm around her grandmother. "You did this, Grandma. You kept that key for all those years. You kept the hope alive." "No," Ruth looked at Sarah. "She did this. This pregnant woman with nothing to lose who found the courage to speak when everyone else was silent." At 10:15 p.m., Sarah's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway. "Mrs. Mitchell?" A woman's voice, cold and hard. "My name is Victoria Garrison Pierce, Arthur's wife." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "I want you to know that you've destroyed my family. My husband is in handcuffs. My children are watching their father be humiliated on national television. Our entire life is collapsing because of you. Your family destroyed itself 100 years ago when your husband's grandfather decided to become a murderer. Charles Garrison built an empire. He provided for this city. He donated to charities. He employed thousands of people. He killed people. He stole everything from the Whitmore family. He let an innocent woman die, believing no one would ever know the truth." Victoria was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Softer, almost defeated. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know any of this. Arthur never told me about the family history. I thought we were just a normal, wealthy family. I thought the money was earned honestly." Sarah felt a flicker of sympathy despite herself. "I believe you." "Does that matter? Does believing me change anything?" "No, but it might make the next part easier." "What next part?" "The part where you decide what kind of person you want to be. The Whitmore family was destroyed by your family's crimes. Margaret Chen grew up without knowing her heritage. My baby is going to be born into a world shaped by a century of lies." Sarah's voice hardened. "You can keep fighting us. You can spend your fortune on lawyers trying to protect what's left of Arthur's reputation. Or you can acknowledge what happened, make amends, and try to build something better." A long silence. "You're asking me to betray my husband." "I'm asking you to choose truth over loyalty, the same choice Abigail Whitmore faced, the same choice Ruth Henderson faced." Sarah paused. "The same choice every woman faces when the men in her life expect her to stay silent." Victoria drew a shaky breath. "I need to think." "Take your time, but not too much. The truth is already out. All you can control now is how you respond to it." The line went dead. At 10:47 p.m., Margaret called everyone together. "The Attorney General's office has been in touch. They want our full cooperation. They're building a comprehensive case against Arthur and potentially other members of the Garrison Pierce organization." "What about the assets?" Daniel asked. "The property, the money. That's going to take time. The courts will need to establish that the original transfer of Whitmore assets was fraudulent. Then they'll need to trace which current holdings derive from those stolen assets." Margaret smiled. "But the preliminary assessment is positive. Very positive." She turned to Sarah. "The lawyers believe the Whitmore estate properly valued is worth somewhere between $50 and $75 million. As the person who discovered the evidence and as a key witness in the case, you'll be entitled to a finder's fee." Sarah's heart stopped. "How much almighty?" "Standard finder's fee for recovered assets is between 5 and 15%. Even at the low end, we're talking about several million dollars." "Several million dollars?" Sarah had $47 in her bank account. She was facing eviction. She'd been eating ramen for weeks to save money, and now someone was telling her she might be worth millions. I can't... She couldn't form words. Eleanor put a hand on her shoulder. Breathe, Sarah, just breathe. This can't be real. It's real. Margaret knelt in front of her. You earned this, not through luck, through courage, through refusing to stay silent when powerful people wanted you to disappear. Sarah started crying, deep racking sobs that shook her entire body. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the desperate hope she'd been holding on to for months, it all came pouring out. Ruth Henderson moved to sit beside her. The old woman who had carried guilt for decades, who had faked her own death to protect her family, who had finally found the courage to speak. When I was young, Ruth said quietly, I told myself that speaking up wouldn't change anything, that the powerful would always win, that people like me didn't matter. She took Sarah's hand. You proved me wrong. You proved all of us wrong. A pregnant widow with nothing to lose brought down a 100-year dynasty of crime. If that's not proof that ordinary people can change the world, I don't know what is. Sarah squeezed the old woman's hand, unable to speak through her tears. At 11:23 p.m., the news broke that Arthur Garrison Pierce had been denied bail. The judge cited flight risk and the severity of the charges. Arthur would remain in custody pending trial. Social media exploded. The story that had started as a viral live stream had become the biggest news event of the year. Journalists were calling it the crime of the century, and a 100-year cover-up finally exposed. Sarah's face was everywhere. The pregnant widow who had uncovered the truth. The woman who had stood up to wealth and power and won. She watched the coverage in a daze, still processing everything that had happened. Her phone was flooded with messages. Old friends reaching out. Strangers expressing support. Media outlets requesting interviews. And one message that made her stop scrolling. From her landlord, Mr. Hendricks. Mrs. Mitchell, I've been watching the news. I had no idea what you were going through. Please disregard the eviction notice. Take as long as you need to figure out your situation, and congratulations on the baby. Sarah laughed out loud. Amazing how quickly people changed when they realized you weren't powerless anymore. At 11:58 p.m., Margaret gathered everyone for one final meeting of the night. Tomorrow was going to be chaos, media interviews, legal proceedings, more revelations as the investigation unfolds. She looked at each of them in turn. But tonight, I want us to remember what this is really about. She pulled out Abigail's journal. A woman wrote these words over 100 years ago. She knew she might not survive. She knew no one believed her, but she refused to let the truth die with her. Margaret's voice cracked. Abigail Whitmore is my grandmother. I never knew her. I never got to hear her voice or feel her arms around me, but I know her through these pages. I know her courage. I know her love. She looked at Sarah, and now I know that her faith wasn't wasted. She believed someone would find what she hid. She believed the truth would eventually matter. And she was right. Margaret closed the journal and held it against her heart. Tomorrow we finish what she started. We make sure her story is told. We make sure justice is served. We make sure no one ever forgets what the Garrison family did and what it cost the people who stood against them. She straightened her shoulders. But tonight, we rest. We've earned it. At 12:17 a.m., Sarah finally lay down on the couch that had become her bed. Her baby was quiet now, sleeping peacefully in her womb, unaware of the chaos swirling around them. Sarah placed her hand on her belly and whispered to her daughter, I did it, baby girl. I don't know how, but I did it. When you're born, you're going to have a future. A real future. Not just surviving day to day, but actually living. She felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but these were different. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Joy. Your daddy would be proud, she whispered. I hope I made him proud. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she slept without fear. In the morning, the world would demand her attention again. There would be interviews and depositions and legal proceedings. There would be challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, she rested. Tonight, she dreamed of Abigail Whitmore, the woman who had hidden a trunk full of truth and believed that someday someone would find it. In her dream, Abigail smiled at her. Not the terrified woman from her earlier nightmare, but peaceful, content, finally at rest. Thank you, Abigail whispered. Thank you for listening. And Sarah, still dreaming, whispered back, Thank you for not giving up. When she woke at 6:34 a.m., sunlight was streaming through the windows. Margaret was already up on the phone orchestrating the chaos of the day ahead. Daniel was reviewing footage from last night. Eleanor sat with Ruth, the two of them talking quietly, rebuilding a relationship that had been fractured for 20 years. Sarah's baby kicked strong and insistent. "Good morning to you too," Sarah murmured, smiling. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it expecting another media request or congratulatory message. Instead, she found a single photograph. Victoria Garrison Pierce standing in what looked like a lawyer's office signing a document. Below the photograph, a message, "You were right. I choose truth. I'm cooperating fully with prosecutors, and I've instructed the Garrison Pierce Foundation to begin negotiations for restitution to the Whitmore heirs. It doesn't undo what was done, but maybe it's a start." Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "It's more than a start. It's hope. Thank you." She showed the message to Margaret, who read it with wide eyes. Victoria is cooperating. Apparently. That changes everything. If she's willing to testify if she has access to Arthur's private records, Margaret shook her head in disbelief. The prosecution's case just got 10 times stronger. Sarah touched her belly, feeling her daughter move. "Maybe people can change," she said softly. "Maybe it's never too late to choose the right side." Margaret smiled. "Maybe not." At 7:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. Daniel answered it and found a delivery person with an enormous bouquet of flowers. "For Sarah Mitchell," the person said. Sarah accepted the bouquet, confused. Who would be sending her flowers? She found the card tucked among the blooms and read it aloud. "From the descendants of Whitmore manufacturing workers circa 1918-1920. Our grandparents lost everything when Charles Garrison took over the company. We've been waiting 100 years for someone to tell the truth. Thank you for being that someone. You've given us closure we thought we'd never have." Beneath the message were over 50 signatures. Sarah sat down heavily, overwhelmed. "They remembered," she whispered. "After all this time, they remembered what happened to their families." Ruth Henderson moved to sit beside her. "Evil doesn't just hurt the obvious victims," the old woman said. "It ripples outward, touching everyone it can reach. When Charles Garrison stole the Whitmore fortune, he didn't just destroy one family. He destroyed hundreds. Workers who lost jobs, suppliers who never got paid, a whole community that suffered because one man decided he wanted more than he deserved." Ruth looked at the signatures on the card. "You didn't just give closure to the Whitmores, Sarah. You gave it to everyone Charles Garrison ever hurt. That's a legacy. That's something worth being proud of." Sarah clutched the card against her heart, feeling the weight of a century of grief and the lightness of a century of truth finally coming to light. Her phone buzzed again, a news alert. Arthur Garrison Pierce charged with additional counts. Evidence suggests active cover-up spanning decades. She showed it to Margaret. "It's working," Margaret said. "Everything we did, everything we risked, it's working." Sarah nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Outside, she could hear the sounds of media vans gathering. Journalists preparing for the next chapter of a story that had captivated the nation. Inside, a group of unlikely allies. A pregnant widow, a civil rights attorney, a documentary filmmaker, a lawyer seeking redemption, and a 93-year-old witness who had finally found her voice, prepared to face whatever came next. Together. The media storm hit at 8:15 a.m. Sarah watched through the window as news vans lined up outside the safe house, reporters jockeying for position, cameras pointed at the door like weapons. Her face was on every screen. Her name was on every tongue. "We need to move," Margaret said, already gathering documents. "This location is compromised." "Where do we go, Bo?" "The Attorney General's office has offered protective custody until the preliminary hearing. It's the safest option." Sarah's baby kicked sharply as if protesting the constant upheaval. How long until the hearing? 3 days. 3 days of hiding, 3 days of waiting, 3 days of wondering what Arthur Garrison Pierce's remaining allies might do to stop them. Eleanor helped Ruth to her feet. The old woman had barely slept, but her eyes were clear, determined. 20 years of hiding had ended. She wasn't going to retreat now. "I'm ready," Ruth said. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready." Saying, at 8:47 a.m., 2 unmarked vehicles pulled up to the rear entrance. Federal marshals emerged professional and alert. The lead marshal, a woman named Torres, approached Margaret with brisk efficiency. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Deputy Marshal Torres. We'll be escorting you to a secure location. Please follow my instructions exactly." They moved quickly, splitting into 2 groups. Sarah, Eleanor, and Ruth went in the first vehicle. Margaret and Daniel followed in the second. As they pulled away, Sarah looked back at the safe house at the reporters still camped out front, oblivious to their escape. She wondered if she'd ever have a normal life again. If her daughter would grow up in the shadow of this scandal. Or maybe in its light. At 9:23 a.m., they arrived at a federal building downtown. Torres led them through security checkpoints down corridors that all looked the same into a suite of rooms that would be their home for the next 3 days. You'll have everything you need here, Torres explained. Food, communications, medical support if necessary. She glanced at Sarah's belly. We have a doctor on call. Just say the word. Thank you. Torres nodded and left them alone. Sarah sank onto a couch exhausted. Her back ached. Her feet were swollen. Her baby was restless, kicking constantly. You need to rest, Eleanor said. The hearing isn't for 3 days. You can't run on adrenaline forever. I know, but every time I close my eyes, I see Arthur Garrison Pierce's face. I see the threats, the surveillance photos, the black SUV following me. He's in custody. He can't hurt you now. His family has been hurting people for 100 years. You think it stops just because he's behind bars? Eleanor didn't have an answer. At 10:15 a.m., Margaret's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her expression shifted from surprise to shock to something Sarah couldn't identify. What? Eleanor demanded. What is it? That was the prosecutor's office. Margaret's voice was strange, distant. Victoria Garrison Pierce didn't just agree to cooperate. She's providing testimony that Arthur was involved in more than just covering up his grandfather's crimes. What do you mean? She's claiming Arthur ordered the murder of a journalist in 2019, a reporter who was investigating the Garrison Pierce Foundation's finances. Sarah felt the room tilt. Murder, recent murder. The journalist was found dead in his apartment, ruled a suicide, but Victoria says Arthur bragged about having him killed, said it was necessary to protect the family. Ruth closed her eyes. The sins of the grandfather passed down through generations. If Victoria's testimony can be corroborated, Arthur is looking at first-degree murder charges, not just obstruction of justice, not just accessory after the fact. Margaret's hands were shaking. He could get the death penalty. The weight of those words settled over the room like a shroud. This wasn't just about historical justice anymore. This was about present-day evil, about a man who had continued his grandfather's legacy of murder into the 21st century. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move. We have to stop him, she said quietly. Not just for Abigail, for everyone he's hurt, everyone he might still hurt if he gets free. At 11:02 a.m., Daniel arrived with new information. I've been digging into the journalist Victoria mentioned. His name was Michael Torres. He was investigating Garrison Pierce Foundation finances when he died. What did he find? I don't know yet, but his widow still has his notes, his research files, everything he was working on before he died. Daniel pulled out his phone. I've made contact. She's willing to meet. Margaret shook her head. It's too dangerous. If Arthur has people watching... Arthur is in jail. His organization is falling apart. His wife is cooperating with prosecutors. Daniel's jaw tightened. This might be our only chance to find out what else he's been hiding. I'll go, Sarah said. Everyone turned to stare at her. You're 7 months pregnant, Eleanor protested. You can't. I can. I'm the face of this story. If Michael Torres' widow sees me, she'll know I'm not working for the Garrison Pierce family. Sarah stood, ignoring the protest from her aching back. And I need to do something. I can't just sit here waiting for the hearing. Margaret studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Daniel goes with you, and you take a marshal escort, non-negotiable. At 12:34 p.m., Sarah and Daniel arrived at a small house on the outskirts of Hartford. A woman in her 40s answered the door. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face drawn with grief that had never fully healed. Mrs. Torres, Sarah asked gently, you're the pregnant woman from the news, the one who found the documents. Yes, ma'am. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm sorry to intrude on your grief, but we believe your husband's death might be connected to the Garrison Pierce family. Mrs. Torres was silent for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. Come in. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to ask about Michael's death. Waiting for someone to believe it wasn't suicide. They sat in a small living room filled with photographs. Michael Torres had been a handsome man with kind eyes. In every picture, he was smiling, alive, full of energy. He didn't kill himself, Mrs. Torres said firmly. I don't care what the police said. Michael would never have done that. He was happy. We were happy. And he was close to something big, something that scared powerful people. What was he investigating? Mrs. Torres stood and walked to a closet. She pulled out a cardboard box filled with files, notebooks, USB drives. Everything he was working on before he died. I saved all of it. I knew someday it would matter. Daniel began going through the files while Sarah talked with Mrs. Torres. He started looking into the Garrison Pierce Foundation about 6 months before he died, Mrs. Torres explained. He said there were discrepancies, money moving through shell companies, donations that didn't add up. Did he find anything specific? He found connections to the Whitmore case, old connections. He was trying to trace how the Garrison family had originally acquired their wealth. Mrs. Torres's voice cracked. He said if he could prove fraud from 100 years ago, it would unravel everything. Sarah felt chills running down her spine. Michael Torres was investigating the same thing I found. Yes, and 2 weeks before he died, he received threats, phone calls in the middle of the night. His car was vandalized. Someone broke into his office and stole his computer. Mrs. Torres wiped tears from her eyes. He was scared. He wanted to stop. But he said the truth was too important to abandon. Did he tell you who was threatening him? He said he couldn't prove it yet, but he knew it was coming from the top, from Arthur Garrison Pierce himself. Daniel looked up from the files. Sarah, you need to see this. He held up a photograph. It showed Arthur Garrison Pierce meeting with another man in what looked like a parking garage. The date stamp was 2 weeks before Michael Torres died. Do you know who that other man is? Sarah asked. Mrs. Torres nodded slowly. That's the man who came to our house the day before Michael died. He said he was a friend of Michael's from work, but Michael didn't have any friends named Victor. At 1:47 p.m., they left Mrs. Torres's house with the box of files. Sarah's mind was racing. Michael Torres had been killed for investigating the same truth she had uncovered. He had gotten close, too close, and Arthur Garrison Pierce had silenced him. But now they had evidence. Photographs. Testimony. A pattern of behavior that stretched across a century of Garrison family crimes. We need to get this to Margaret, Daniel said. This changes everything. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You should have stayed hidden, Mrs. Mitchell. Now you've made this personal. Her blood ran cold. Daniel, they know we were at Mrs. Torres's house. How is that possible? Arthur's in jail. He has people. He's always had people. Sarah looked around, suddenly aware of every car, every shadow. We need to move, now. At 2:15 p.m., they were back at the Federal Building. Sarah handed the box of files to Margaret, who began reviewing them with growing alarm. This is explosive, Margaret said. If we can prove Arthur ordered Michael Torres's murder, it's not just about the Whitmore case anymore. It's about a pattern of criminal behavior spanning decades. Can we prove it? Maybe. The photograph places Arthur with an unidentified man 2 weeks before the murder. We need to identify that man, find out who he is and what his connection to Arthur might be. Marshal Torres appeared at the door. Mrs. Chen, there's a development you need to know about. What kind of development? Arthur Garrison Pierce just fired his entire legal team. He's representing himself at the preliminary hearing. Everyone stared. That's insane, Eleanor said. He's facing murder charges. Why would he fire his lawyers? Maybe because his lawyers told him something he didn't want to hear, Margaret suggested. Maybe they told him there was no way to win. Or maybe he's planning something, Sarah said quietly, something his lawyers wouldn't go along with. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. At 3:33 p.m., Sarah's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway. Mrs. Mitchell? Arthur Garrison Pierce's voice was calm, almost pleasant. I hope you're enjoying your accommodations. Sarah's heart stopped. How are you calling me? You're supposed to be in custody. Prisoners are allowed phone calls, Mrs. Mitchell. Even accused murderers have rights. He paused. I wanted to congratulate you. You've accomplished more in a few weeks than Abigail Whitmore accomplished in her entire life. You should be proud. What do you want? I want to offer you a deal. One final chance to walk away before things get ugly. Your family's crimes are public knowledge. Your wife is testifying against you. You have nothing to bargain with. Don't I? Arthur's voice dropped. I know you visited Maria Torres today. I know you have her husband's files. And I know that if those files become public, certain people will be very unhappy. People who have been protecting the Garrison family for generations. What people to judges, politicians, law enforcement officials? Do you think my grandfather built his empire alone? Do you think I've maintained it without help? Arthur laughed softly. You've uncovered the tip of the iceberg, Mrs. Mitchell. The real corruption goes much deeper, and some of those corrupt people are the ones who are supposed to be protecting you right now. Sarah looked at Marshal Torres, who was watching her with concern. You're bluffing. Am I? Ask yourself this. How did I know you visited Maria Torres? How do I know where you are right now? How am I able to call you on a number that's supposed to be secure? Sarah's hand trembled. What do you want? Destroy the Torres files. Refuse to testify at the hearing. Walk away and live your life. If you do that, I promise you'll never hear from me again. You and your daughter can disappear. Start fresh somewhere new. And if I don't, then you'll discover just how deep the corruption goes. And trust me, Mrs. Mitchell, you won't like what you find. The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen, staring at her phone. What did he say? Margaret demanded. He said... Sarah swallowed hard. He said some of the people protecting us might be working for him. At 4:18 p.m., Margaret convened an emergency meeting. We have to assume Arthur was telling the truth, she said. If he has people inside law enforcement inside the judicial system, we can't trust anyone. So what do we do? Eleanor asked. We go public again. Margaret pulled out her laptop. We release everything. The Torres files, the photographs, Victoria's testimony, all of it. We make it impossible for anyone to bury this. Arthur will retaliate. Arthur is in jail facing murder charges. His ability to retaliate is limited. Margaret's eyes were hard. But his allies aren't. That's why we need to move fast, before they can coordinate. Daniel was already setting up his camera. I can have this uploaded in an hour. Do it. And Daniel? Margaret paused.
Make
sure you include Sarah's story, all of it. The threats, the surveillance, the phone call from Arthur. The world needs to know what we're up against. At 5:07 p.m., they went live again. This time, the audience was even larger. Millions of viewers worldwide drawn by the scandal that had captivated the nation. Sarah spoke first, holding up the photograph from Michael Torres's files. This is Arthur Garrison Pierce meeting with an unidentified man 2 weeks before journalist Michael Torres was murdered. Michael was investigating the same truth I uncovered. He was getting close, and he was silenced. She looked directly into the camera. 1 hour ago, Arthur Garrison Pierce called me from prison. He threatened me. He told me that some of the people supposed to be protecting me are actually working for him. He told me to destroy evidence and refuse to testify. Her voice hardened. I'm not going to do that. I don't care how powerful he is. I don't care how many people he's corrupted. The truth is coming out. All of it. And there's nothing he can do to stop it. Margaret took over presenting the Torres files in devastating detail. Financial records showing money laundering. Communications suggesting witness intimidation. A pattern of criminal behavior that made Charles Garrison's original crimes look almost quaint. By 6:00 p.m., the live stream had been viewed by over 10 million people. By 6:30 p.m., the FBI announced it was opening a formal investigation into corruption within Hartford law enforcement. By 7:00 p.m., 3 Hartford police officers had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. At 7:34 p.m., Marshal Torres approached Sarah with a strange expression. Mrs. Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. Who? She says her name is Elizabeth Chen. She says she's your grandmother. Sarah stared. My grandmother died years ago. I don't have any living grandparents. She's very insistent. And she has documentation, birth certificates, family records. Torres hesitated. She says you need to know the truth about your family before the hearing. Sarah looked at Margaret, who seemed equally confused. Let her in. A few minutes later, an elderly woman entered the room. She was small, elegant, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Sarah Mitchell, the woman said. You have your mother's face. I don't understand. Who are you? My name is Elizabeth Chen, and before you say anything, no, I'm not Margaret's mother, Elizabeth. I'm a different Elizabeth Chen. The old woman sat down heavily. I'm your father's mother. The grandmother you were told was dead. Sarah's world tilted. That's impossible. My father said, your father lied, or rather, he believed the lie he was told. Elizabeth pulled out a worn photograph. This is your father as a baby. This is me holding him, and this is the man who took him from me. Sarah looked at the photograph and felt her breath catch. The man in the picture was Charles Garrison. I don't understand, Sarah whispered. How is Charles Garrison connected to my family? Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. Because Charles Garrison was my father and your father's grandfather, which means, Sarah, that you are a Garrison. The room went absolutely silent. Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. That's impossible. It's not. Charles Garrison had many affairs. My mother was one of his victims. She was a factory worker at Whitmore Manufacturing. She became pregnant. Charles refused to acknowledge me, but he provided money for my upbringing on the condition that I never reveal my parentage. Elizabeth's voice shook with decades of suppressed pain. I met a man named Thomas Chen. We fell in love. We had a son, your father. When your father was 3, Charles Garrison's people came to us. They said there was a family matter that needed to be resolved. They took your father and placed him with another family. Told me if I tried to contact him, they would destroy us. They stole your son. They stole everything. My child. My husband's will to live. Our future. Elizabeth wiped her eyes. I've spent 50 years searching for my son. When I finally found him, he had been raised to believe his birth parents had abandoned him. He wanted nothing to do with me. Sarah thought about her father, about his coldness, his distance, about the way he'd moved to Arizona and started a new family and never looked back. He didn't know the truth. No, he believed what he was told, that his real parents didn't want him. Elizabeth reached out and took Sarah's hand. But I want you to understand something, Sarah. You are not just a random woman who found evidence in an attic. You are Charles Garrison's great-granddaughter. You have his blood in your veins. Why does that matter? Because it gives you standing. Legal standing. If you're a Garrison heir, you have rights to the family estate. Rights that supersede Arthur's claims. Elizabeth squeezed her hand. You're not just a witness, Sarah. You're a claimant. And that changes everything. At 8:15 p.m., Margaret emerged from a long phone call with the legal team. It's true, she said, looking shaken. We've verified Elizabeth's documentation. Sarah Mitchell is the biological great-granddaughter of Charles Garrison through an illegitimate line. What does that mean for the case? It means Sarah isn't just a finder of evidence. She's a direct descendant with legitimate claims to Garrison family assets. And because she was denied her inheritance through fraud and deception, she has grounds to sue for everything. Sarah couldn't process what she was hearing. I don't want Garrison money. I don't want anything from that family. It's not about wanting it. It's about legal rights. And it's about justice. Margaret sat down beside her. Charles Garrison stole the Whitmore fortune. He also abandoned his illegitimate children and their descendants. The courts can order restitution not just to the Whitmore heirs, but to all of Charles Garrison's victims, including you. And my father, him too if he wants to participate, though given your description of him, I doubt he will. Sarah thought about calling her father, about telling him the truth about his birth, about his real mother, about everything that had been stolen from him. Later, she said, after the hearing. I can't deal with that right now. At 9:02 p.m., Arthur Garrison Pierce made another phone call. This time, Sarah didn't answer. She let it go to voicemail. His message was brief. I know who you really are now, cousin. This changes things. We should talk before the hearing. Family to family. She deleted the message without listening to it twice. At 9:47 p.m., Ruth Henderson asked to speak with Sarah privately. They sat together in a small room off the main suite, 2 women separated by generations but connected by the same web of Garrison family crimes. I knew your grandmother, Ruth said quietly. Charles's illegitimate daughter. I remember when she used to come to the house hoping to see her father. He never received her, not once. Did you know about my father? I knew Elizabeth had a son. I knew he was taken. I didn't know what happened to him after that. Ruth's hands trembled. So many secrets, so many lives destroyed. And for what money power? The illusion of respectability. It ends now, Sarah said. All of it. The secrets, the lies, the corruption. Can it really end? Ruth looked at her with ancient, weary eyes. I've watched 3 generations of Garrisons perpetuate their grandfather's crimes. I've watched them buy judges and intimidate witnesses and destroy anyone who got in their way. What makes you think this generation will be different? Because this generation got caught. Because the whole world is watching. Because I won't let them win. Ruth studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. You know, I used to think Abigail Whitmore was the bravest woman I ever knew. Facing down Charles Garrison with nothing but her convictions and a trunk full of evidence. Ruth smiled sadly. I was wrong. You're braver. Because you're doing what she did, but you're doing it pregnant alone and with the whole world watching. I'm not alone. I have Margaret, Daniel, Eleanor, you. Yes, you do. And that's something Abigail never had. Ruth took Sarah's hand. Don't let them break you, child. Whatever happens at the hearing, whatever tricks Arthur tries to pull, don't let them break you. Promise me. I promise. At 10:23 p.m. news broke that changed everything. Daniel burst into the room with his laptop. You need to see this, now. On the screen, a news anchor was reporting live from the Hartford Federal Courthouse. We're receiving reports that Arthur Garrison Pierce has escaped from federal custody. Details are still emerging, but sources say he overpowered a guard during transfer and fled the facility approximately 30 minutes ago. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. "He's out," she whispered. "He's out, and he's coming for us." Marshal Torres appeared immediately. "We're locking down the building. No one in or out until we have confirmation of Garrison's location." "How did this happen?" Margaret demanded. "He was supposed to be in maximum security." "We're investigating. Right now our priority is keeping all of you safe." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Tick-tock, cousin. See you soon." At 11:15 p.m. sirens filled the air outside the federal building. Sarah watched from a window as police cars raced past. Helicopters circled overhead, searchlights swept across the city. The largest manhunt in Hartford history was underway, and somewhere out there Arthur Garrison Pierce was free. "He won't come here," Eleanor said, trying to sound confident. "This building is a fortress. He'd be insane to try." "He's already insane," Ruth said quietly. "He's always been insane, just like his grandfather, just like all of them." Margaret was on the phone, constantly coordinating with lawyers, prosecutors, media contacts. The hearing was scheduled for the day after tomorrow. If Arthur wasn't captured by then, everything could fall apart. "We need contingency plans," Margaret said. "If Arthur can't be located, the hearing may be postponed. That gives him time to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, maybe even flee the country." "So we make sure he's captured," Sarah said. "We draw him out." "How?" Sarah thought for a moment. Then she picked up her phone. "I'm going to call him back." At 11:47 p.m., Sarah dialed the number Arthur had called from earlier. He answered on the second ring. "Cousin, I was hoping you'd reach out." "Where are you, Arthur?" "That would spoil the surprise, but don't worry, I'm closer than you think." "What do you want?" "I want to make a deal, a real deal, not the nonsense my lawyers were pushing." Arthur's voice was eerily calm. "You're a Garrison, Sarah. Whether you like it or not, we're family, and family should stick together. Your grandfather murdered my great-grandmother's employer and stole his fortune. Your family abandoned my grandmother and kidnapped my father. You've threatened to kill me multiple times. We're not family, Arthur. We're enemies." Such harsh words, but here's the reality, cousin. The hearing is in 2 days. Without me present, it will be delayed. Without a conviction, the Whitmore heirs can't claim restitution. And without restitution, all your hard work means nothing. You're going to be captured. Maybe, maybe not. But here's my offer, meet me tonight. Just the two of us. We'll talk, we'll negotiate, and I'll turn myself in peacefully. He paused. Or I can disappear, leave the country, spend the rest of my life somewhere they can't extradite me, and you can spend the rest of your life knowing you came so close to justice but couldn't quite reach it. Sarah looked at Margaret, who was listening through a separate line. Margaret shook her head firmly. "No." "Where do you want to meet?" Sarah asked. "The Whitmore mansion, midnight. Come alone." At 11:58 p.m., Sarah walked out of the federal building. Marshal Torres had argued. Margaret had pleaded. Eleanor had cried. But Sarah had made her decision. "He won't stop," she'd told them. "He'll keep running, keep hiding, keep pulling strings, unless someone ends this, tonight." "You're pregnant," Margaret had said. "You're putting your baby at risk." "My baby will never be safe as long as Arthur Garrison Pierce is free. None of us will be." So she walked out into the night, a wire hidden under her clothes, a GPS tracker in her pocket, knowing that police would be waiting nearby, hoping Arthur wouldn't notice. The Whitmore mansion loomed ahead, dark and silent, the place where everything had started. Sarah pushed open the gate and walked toward the house where Abigail Whitmore had hidden her truth, where Sarah had found it, where the final confrontation would take place. At 12:03 a.m., she stepped through the front door. Arthur was waiting in the foyer. He looked different than he had on television. Disheveled, wild-eyed. The polished businessman facade had crumbled completely. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "You gave me no choice." "There's always a choice, cousin. That's what my grandfather taught me. Every situation has options. You just have to be willing to do what others won't." "Like murder." Arthur smiled. It was terrifying. "Like whatever is necessary. My grandfather understood that. He built an empire for nothing because he wasn't afraid to make hard decisions. He built an empire on theft and murder, and now it's all falling apart." "Is it?" Arthur stepped closer. "Let me tell you something, cousin. Even if I go to prison, even if I die in there, the Garrison legacy will continue. My children, my grandchildren, the network of powerful people who depend on our money, our influence." Your wife is testifying against you. Your children will grow up knowing their father is a murderer. Your legacy is ashes. Arthur's face twisted with rage. Victoria betrayed me. She'll pay for that. They'll all pay. No, Arthur. You'll pay. Tonight. Right now. Sarah touched her wire. This conversation is being recorded. Police are surrounding the building. Your escape ends here. Arthur stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. You think I didn't know? You think I'm stupid enough to fall for a wire? He pulled out a device and pressed a button. Jammer. Nothing is being transmitted. Nothing is being recorded. Sarah's heart dropped. Arthur. Now it's just us, cousin. Family. He stepped closer and Sarah saw the gun in his hand. Let's talk about legacy. Sarah backed away, her hand instinctively covering her belly. Don't do this. Don't do what? End the threat to my family. Protect what's mine. Arthur raised the gun. You should have taken my deal, Sarah. You should have walked away when you had the chance. Like Abigail should have walked away, like Michael Torres should have walked away, like everyone you've ever hurt should have just accepted their fate. Yes, exactly like that. I won't. Then you'll die, just like they did. Sarah closed her eyes, bracing for the shot. It never came. Instead, she heard a voice from the shadows. Put the gun down, Arthur. Victoria Garrison Pierce stepped into the light. She was holding a weapon of her own, pointed directly at her husband. Victoria, Arthur's voice shook. What are you doing, Safu? What I should have done years ago, what I should have done the first time I suspected what you really were. Victoria's hand was steady. Drop the gun. You won't shoot me. You love me. I loved who I thought you were. A good man, a family man. Someone who built things instead of destroying them. Victoria's eyes were cold. That man never existed, did he? Victoria, listen to me. Drop the gun, now. Arthur hesitated. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. The moment it touched the ground, the doors burst open. Police flooded in, surrounding Arthur, forcing him to his knees. Sarah sagged against the wall, trembling, her baby kicking frantically. Victoria crossed the room and helped her stand. Are you all right? How did you know? I've been tracking Arthur's movements since he escaped. I knew he'd come here. This is where it all started. This is where he wanted it to end. Victoria looked back at her husband now in handcuffs being led away by officers. I just couldn't let it end the way he wanted. At 12:34 a.m., Sarah was loaded into an ambulance. The stress had triggered contractions. Not labor, the paramedics assured her, but close enough to require monitoring. As they drove toward the hospital, Sarah thought about everything that had happened. The mansion, the trunk, the journal, the conspiracy, the confrontation, and now Arthur Garrison Pierce was finally truly captured. This time there would be no escape. This time justice would be served. Her baby kicked gentler now, reassuring. It's over, Sarah whispered to her daughter. It's finally over. But even as she said the words, she knew the hardest part was still ahead. The hearing, the testimony, the long process of unwinding a century of corruption. She was ready. For the first time in months, she was truly ready. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors tracking Sarah's contractions. It was 2:17 a.m. The doctors had stabilized her, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. The stress of confronting Arthur had pushed her body to its limits. Margaret sat beside her bed, refusing to leave. You scared us half to death. I scared myself. Sarah's hand rested on her belly. But it worked. Arthur's in custody, for real this time. They've got him in a maximum security facility, federal marshals guarding every exit. He's not escaping again. And the hearing, postponed by 1 day, the judge agreed it was necessary given the circumstances. Margaret smiled wearily. You'll have time to recover before you testify. Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. I keep thinking about Abigail, about what she went through. She didn't have doctors or hospitals or people protecting her. She faced Charles Garrison alone. You're not alone, Sarah. You never were. I know. That's what makes this different. That's what makes this time matter. At 6:34 a.m., Sarah woke to find Ruth Henderson sitting in the chair Margaret had vacated. The old woman was watching her with an expression Sarah couldn't read. How long have you been there? A few hours. I couldn't sleep. Ruth's voice was soft. I keep thinking about what happened at the mansion, about Arthur holding that gun on you, about how close we came to losing everything. But we didn't lose. No, we didn't, Ruth leaned forward. I want to tell you something, Sarah. Something I've never told anyone. What? The night William Whitmore died, I was in the hallway outside his room. I heard Charles Garrison talking to someone, another man. They were discussing how to handle the aftermath, how to ensure Abigail's accusations would be dismissed. Sarah's breath caught. Who was the other man? The police chief of Hartford. Charles had him in his pocket from the beginning. That's why Abigail's complaints were never investigated. That's why no one believed her. Ruth's hands trembled. I could have come forward. I could have told someone what I heard, but I was 19 years old and terrified, and I thought no one would believe a servant over two powerful men. You were young. You were scared. I was a coward. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. For 100 years, I've carried that cowardice, watching it destroy lives, watching it perpetuate injustice, and I did nothing. You're doing something now, only because you gave me the courage. Ruth took Sarah's hand. When I watched you on that live stream, when I saw you standing up to Arthur Garrison Pierce with nothing but the truth in your pregnant belly, I realized something. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite the fear. It's choosing to speak even when your voice shakes. My voice was definitely shaking. But you spoke anyway. That's what matters. Ruth squeezed her hand. Tomorrow at the hearing, I'm going to testify. I'm going to tell the court everything I witnessed, everything I've been hiding for a century. Are you sure? I'm 93 years old. I've spent enough of my life being afraid. Whatever time I have left, I want to spend it telling the truth. At 9:15 a.m., the doctor cleared Sarah for discharge. Her contractions had stopped. Her baby was healthy, but the doctor warned her to avoid stress, which made everyone in the room laugh bitterly. I'll try, Sarah said, but I have a hearing tomorrow. I know, I've been following the news like everyone else in America. The doctor handed her discharge papers. For what it's worth, Mrs. Mitchell, what you're doing is extraordinary. My grandfather worked at Whitmore Manufacturing. He lost everything when Charles Garrison took over. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be strong. Finish what you started. The doctor smiled, and try to wait until after the hearing to have that baby. At 11:47 a.m., Sarah arrived at the federal building to prepare for her testimony. Lawyers were everywhere, coordinating arguments, reviewing evidence, preparing witnesses. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Margaret pulled Sarah into a quiet room. We need to talk about something before tomorrow. What? The prosecutors want you to testify about being a Garrison heir, about your family connection to Charles. Sarah felt her stomach drop. I don't want to claim anything from that family. I know, but your status as a descendant gives you standing that no one else has. It proves that Charles Garrison's crimes didn't just hurt the Whitmores. They hurt his own family, too. The children he abandoned. The descendants he denied. So I have to stand up there and admit I'm related to a murderer. You have to stand up there and show that being related to evil doesn't make you evil. That blood doesn't determine character, that you chose truth over family loyalty. Margaret's voice softened. Sarah, you have a chance to redefine what the Garrison name means. Instead of corruption and murder, it can mean courage and redemption. Sarah thought about her father, about Elizabeth Chen, the grandmother she'd just discovered, about all the lives Charles Garrison had damaged across generations. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. At 2:33 p.m., Victoria Garrison Pierce arrived at the federal building. Sarah watched her approach, unsure how to feel. This woman had saved her life, but she was also married to the man who had tried to kill her. Mrs. Mitchell, Victoria's voice was formal, controlled. I wanted to see you before tomorrow, to explain. Explain what? Why I followed Arthur to the mansion, why I was carrying a gun, why I was prepared to shoot my own husband. Sarah waited. When Arthur escaped, I knew immediately where he'd go. The Whitmore mansion was always an obsession for him. He talked about it constantly, about how it should have been demolished years ago, about how it represented everything he wanted to erase. Victoria's hands clenched. I knew he'd go there to destroy you, to destroy the evidence, to burn it all down if necessary. So you followed him. I couldn't let him kill anyone else. I couldn't let him turn our children into the descendants of a murderer. Victoria's voice cracked. They're going to grow up knowing their father is in prison. They're going to carry that shame forever. But at least they won't have to carry the shame of his crimes being covered up. At least they'll know the truth. That's more than a lot of people get. Is it enough? Victoria looked at Sarah with desperate eyes. Is knowing the truth enough to build a life on? Sarah thought about her own childhood, about her father's coldness, about the lies that had shaped her family for generations. "It's a start," she said. Truth is always a start. At 4:18 p.m., Sarah received an unexpected phone call. "Sarah, it's Dad." She nearly dropped the phone. "Dad, I've been watching the news. I saw what you found, what you did." Her father's voice was strained, unfamiliar. "I saw the story about my mother, my real mother." "You know?" "It's everywhere. Elizabeth Chen, the woman who was supposedly dead, the woman Charles Garrison stole me from." A long pause. "Is it true?" "Yes, she's here. She wants to see you." Silence stretched between them. Sarah could hear her father breathing, could imagine him processing information that shattered everything he believed about himself. "I spent my whole life thinking I was abandoned, thinking my birth parents didn't want me, thinking I wasn't good enough." His voice broke. "And now you're telling me I was stolen." "You were a victim, Dad, just like everyone else Charles Garrison hurt." "I need to think. I don't know what I need." Another pause. "Sarah." "Yes?" "I'm sorry for everything, for being distant, for not being there when David died, for not being a better father." His voice was thick with tears. "I didn't know how to be. I didn't know who I was. And now I find out I never knew anything at all." "It's not too late, Dad, to know who you are, to be who you want to be." Maybe it's not." He cleared his throat. "I'm flying to Hartford. I'll be there tomorrow for the hearing." After the call ended, Sarah sat very still, trying to process what had just happened. Her father, the man who had barely acknowledged her existence for years, was coming to support her. Maybe truth really could change people. Maybe it wasn't ever too late. At 6:02 p.m., the legal team gathered for a final briefing. Margaret laid out the strategy. Ruth would testify, first establishing the historical foundation. Victoria would follow, connecting past crimes to present-day cover-ups. Sarah would testify last, tying everything together. "The prosecution has agreed to present our evidence alongside the criminal case," Margaret explained. "This is unprecedented, a civil claim and criminal prosecution running simultaneously, but the judge agreed it was necessary given the scope of the conspiracy." "What about Arthur?" Eleanor asked. "Will he be in the courtroom?" "Yes, he insisted on representing himself. The judge tried to dissuade him, but he has the right to face his accusers." Sarah felt a chill. "So I'll have to testify with him watching." "Yes, but he'll be in chains surrounded by marshals. He can't hurt you. All he can do is watch as everything he tried to protect crumbles around him." At 8:47 p.m., Sarah finally had a moment alone. She sat in a quiet room, her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move. The baby had been active all day, as if sensing the tension building toward tomorrow. "One more day, baby girl," Sarah whispered. "One more day, and then we can start building our future." Her phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. "Checking in, how are you holding up? Terrified, exhausted, ready?" "That sounds about right. For what it's worth, you've inspired millions of people. The hashtag Justice for Abigail has been trending for 3 days straight." Sarah smiled despite herself. A hashtag. Abigail Whitmore, who had died alone and unbelieved, now had millions of people championing her cause. "She would have liked that," Sarah typed back. "I think she would have liked you." At 10:15 p.m., Elizabeth Chen came to see Sarah. Her newly discovered grandmother moved slowly, age weighing on every step, but her eyes were bright with purpose. "I spoke with your father," Elizabeth said. "He called me." "What did he say?" "He cried. For an hour, he just cried. 50 years of grief and confusion pouring out." Elizabeth sat down heavily. "He asked me why I let them take him, why I didn't fight harder." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that I did fight, that I hired lawyers who were bought off, that I went to the police who were in Charles Garrison's pocket, that I spent everything I had trying to find him." Elizabeth's voice trembled. "But the truth is, I failed. No matter how hard I tried, I failed, and my son grew up believing no one wanted him." "You didn't fail. You survived. You're here now." "Is that enough? Can surviving ever be enough when so much was lost?" Sarah thought about her own survival, about the months after David's death, when she'd barely managed to keep going, about the moment she'd found Abigail's trunk and discovered something worth fighting for. "Sometimes surviving is the beginning," she said. "Sometimes you have to survive long enough for the world to be ready for your story." Elizabeth smiled through her tears. "You sound like Abigail, strong, defiant, unwilling to surrender even when everything seems lost. I'll take that as a compliment. It's the highest compliment I can give. At 7:00 a.m. the day of the hearing arrived. Sarah woke after a few hours of fitful sleep, her body aching, her mind racing. Today would determine everything. Today, after a century of silence, the truth would finally be spoken in a court of law. Margaret helped her dress in a simple black dress that accommodated her pregnant belly. Professional but not formal. Strong but not aggressive. Remember, Margaret said, you're not just telling your story. You're telling Abigail's story, William's story, everyone who was silenced by the Garrison family over the past 100 years. No pressure, Margaret smiled. You've already faced down Arthur Garrison Pierce with a gun pointed at your chest. A courtroom should be easy. At 8:34 a.m. they arrived at the federal courthouse. The crowd outside was enormous. Supporters holding signs, reporters with cameras, descendants of Whitmore manufacturing workers who had traveled from across the country to witness history. Sarah walked through the gauntlet of attention with her head held high. Margaret on one side, Eleanor on the other, Ruth Henderson following behind, 93 years old and finally ready to speak. At the courthouse steps, Sarah paused and turned to face the crowd. Whatever happens today? She said, her voice carrying across the gathered masses. Remember that the truth was worth fighting for. Abigail Whitmore knew that. She believed that. And she was right. The crowd erupted in cheers. At 9:00 a.m., Sharp Judge Patricia Townsend called the hearing to order. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled. Every eye focused on the proceedings that would determine the fate of one of America's oldest fortunes. Arthur Garrison Pierce sat at the defense table, hands cuffed to a chain around his waist. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than he had in his mugshots. The man who had terrorized Hartford for decades reduced to a prisoner in his own courtroom. His eyes found Sarah in the gallery, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Hatred, fear, or maybe just maybe resignation. The prosecutor, a woman named Janet Morrison, stood to make her opening statement. Your Honor, we are here today to address crimes spanning more than a century. From the murder of William Whitmore in 1918 to the murder of journalist Michael Torres in 2019, the Garrison family has systematically stolen, lied, intimidated, and killed to protect their ill-gotten fortune. She turned to face Arthur. The defendant before you is not just a criminal. He is the inheritor of a criminal legacy. A man who chose to continue his grandfather's crimes rather than break the cycle of corruption. A man who threatened witnesses, ordered murders, and escaped federal custody in a desperate attempt to silence the truth. Janet's voice hardened. Today, that truth will finally be spoken, and no amount of wealth, influence, or intimidation will stop it. At 9:23 a.m., Ruth Henderson took the stand. She walked slowly, leaning on her cane, but her voice was steady as she took the oath. Please state your name for the record, Janet said. Ruth Henderson, formerly Ruth Wilson. I served as lady's maid to Abigail Whitmore from 1917 to 1920. A murmur swept through the courtroom. The oldest living witness to the original crime. Mrs. Henderson, please tell the court what you witnessed on the night of November 15, 1918. Ruth took a deep breath. I was in the hallway outside William Whitmore's bedroom. He was ill with influenza, or so we were told. I heard voices from inside the room, Charles Garrison and William arguing. What were they arguing about? Business matters. William had discovered irregularities in the company accounts. He was accusing Charles of stealing from him. Ruth's voice trembled, but didn't break. Then I heard Charles say something I'll never forget. He said, "You should have stayed out of my business, William. Now I have to clean up this mess." What happened next? The voices stopped. Everything was quiet for a long time. Then Charles Garrison emerged from the room. He was carrying a small vial. He looked right at me, and he smiled. The courtroom was absolutely silent. An hour later, William Whitmore was dead. At 10:15 a.m., Victoria Garrison Pierce took the stand. She looked composed, elegant even, but Sarah could see the tremor in her hands. Mrs. Garrison Pierce, Janet began, you were married to the defendant for 27 years. During that time, did you ever witness criminal activity? Yes, Victoria's voice was clear. I witnessed my husband order the murder of Michael Torres. Gasps from the gallery. Arthur's face went white. Please describe what you witnessed. In December 2019, Arthur came home furious. He said a reporter was digging into our finances. He said the reporter had to be stopped. I thought he meant legally. Lawsuits. Injunctions. Victoria paused. Then Arthur made a phone call. He said, handle the Torres problem. Make it look like suicide. Did you confront him about this? No, I was afraid. I told myself I'd misheard. that Arthur couldn't possibly have meant what I thought he meant. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. 2 weeks later, Michael Torres was dead, and I knew the truth. I knew exactly what my husband was. Why didn't you come forward? Because I was a coward, because I was afraid of losing everything, my home, my status, my children's future. Victoria looked directly at Sarah. It took watching a pregnant widow risk everything to expose the truth before I found the courage to do the same. At 11:02 a.m., the prosecution presented the physical evidence. Charles Garrison's ledger with its meticulous records of bribery, fraud, and murder, the forged documents showing how he'd stolen the Whitmore fortune, Abigail's journal, her desperate account of a husband's death, and a widow's futile quest for justice. One by one, the pieces of a century-old puzzle came together. Margaret testified about her family's history, about her mother Elizabeth, who had been raised believing she was an orphan, about the systematic erasure of the Whitmore name from Hartford's records. Daniel presented his documentary footage. Hours of interviews with descendants of Whitmore workers. Testimonies about lost jobs, lost savings, lost futures. Eleanor spoke about her grandmother's guilt, about the secret that had haunted her family for generations, about the key that had finally unlocked the truth. At 12:34 p.m., the court broke for lunch. Sarah sat in a quiet room with Margaret and Eleanor picking at food she couldn't taste. "It's working," Margaret said. "The judge is engaged. The evidence is overwhelming. Arthur hasn't even attempted to cross-examine most of our witnesses." "He's saving it for me," Sarah said. "He's going to try to discredit me when I testify." "Let him try. The evidence speaks for itself." "But I'm his cousin, his family. He'll use that against me." "Then use it against him first." Margaret's eyes were fierce. "You're not just a Garrison descendant, Sarah. You're a Whitmore champion, a Torres avenger, a voice for everyone who was silenced. Own all of it, all of who you are." At 1:47 p.m., Sarah Mitchell took the stand. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her baby was kicking frantically, responding to the surge of adrenaline, but her voice was steady as she took the oath. "Please state your name for the record." "Sarah Mitchell, formerly Sarah Chen." She looked directly at Arthur. "Great-granddaughter of Charles Garrison through his illegitimate daughter Elizabeth." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. "Mrs. Mitchell, please tell the court how you came to discover the evidence in this case." Sarah told her story. The eviction notice. The job at the mansion. The hidden door. The trunk. The journal. She told them about the threats. The surveillance. The phone calls offering money to keep silent. She told them about the night at the mansion. About Arthur with a gun. About Victoria saving her life. And then Janet asked the question everyone was waiting for. "Mrs. Mitchell, as a descendant of Charles Garrison, you have a legal claim to a portion of the Garrison estate. Why are you testifying against your own family?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Because blood doesn't determine character. Because being related to someone evil doesn't make you evil. And because some things matter more than money or family loyalty." She looked at Arthur, who was staring at her with undisguised hatred. "My great-grandfather was a monster. He murdered William Whitmore. He destroyed Abigail Whitmore's life. He stole from his own children and abandoned them to poverty. He built an empire on theft and blood and silence." Her voice rose. "For 100 years that empire has stood. For 100 years the Garrison family has used wealth and power to escape consequences. But not anymore." Sarah stood, though no one had given her permission. "I am a Garrison. I carry that name in my blood. But I also carry the blood of Elizabeth Chen, who was stolen from her mother. I carry the spirit of Abigail Whitmore, who never stopped fighting for truth. I carry the memory of my husband David, who taught me that being good matters more than being safe." She looked at the judge, at the jury, at the packed gallery. "I am here to say that the Garrison legacy ends today, not with more silence, not with more cover-ups, with truth, with justice, with the courage to finally speak." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Townsend banged her gavel, but even she seemed moved. At 2:33 p.m., Arthur Garrison Pierce rose to cross-examine. He shuffled to the podium chains, rattling, looking nothing like the powerful businessman who had terrorized Hartford. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his voice hoarse, "you claim to be motivated by justice, but isn't it true that you stand to gain millions of dollars from this case?" "Possibly. The courts will decide what I'm entitled to." "So you're not doing this out of altruism. You're doing it for money." "I'm doing it because it's right. If I receive compensation, it will be because the courts determine I was wronged, not because I sought it out. You broke into a house you were hired to clean. You stole property from that house. You contacted strangers and made wild accusations. Arthur's voice grew stronger. You're not a hero, Mrs. Mitchell. You're a criminal, a thief, a liar seeking publicity. Sarah felt her anger rising but kept her voice calm. I found evidence that your grandfather murdered William Whitmore. I found evidence that you murdered Michael Torres. I found evidence of a century of corruption, bribery, and intimidation. She leaned forward. Everything I took from that house I turned over to the authorities. Everything I found I shared with the court. What have you done with the secrets your family kept? Arthur's face reddened. You're a disgrace to the Garrison name. Good. The Garrison name was a disgrace to humanity. I'm proud to help end it. At 3:15 p.m., Arthur made his fatal mistake. Frustrated by Sarah's composure, he abandoned his prepared questions and began ranting. You have no idea what you've done. You've destroyed a legacy that took generations to build. You've ruined innocent people. My children, my grandchildren. They'll pay for your crusade for the rest of their lives. Your children will know the truth, Sarah said calmly. They'll know that their father chose to continue the crimes instead of ending them. They'll know that when they had a chance to make things right, you threatened to kill a pregnant woman instead. I should have killed you when I had the chance. The courtroom gasped. Arthur seemed to realize what he'd said. His face went white. Judge Townsend's voice was ice. Mr. Garrison Pierce, you have just threatened a witness in open court. Bailiff, remove the defendant. This cross-examination is over. As marshals dragged Arthur away, he screamed over his shoulder, This isn't over. The Garrisons will rise again. You can't destroy 100 years of legacy with a few documents and a pregnant... The doors slammed shut, cutting off his words. The courtroom was silent. Then slowly, Sarah began to laugh. Not cruel laughter. Not triumphant laughter. Just pure, overwhelming relief. At 4:47 p.m., Judge Townsend rendered her preliminary judgment. In the matter of the United States versus Arthur Garrison Pierce, I find sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on charges of first-degree murder conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and criminal facilitation of a century-long fraud. She turned to the civil matters. In the matter of the Whitmore estate claims, I find overwhelming evidence that the original transfer of assets from Whitmore Manufacturing to Charles Garrison was accomplished through fraud, forgery, and potentially murder. I am recommending immediate appointment of a special master to trace all assets derived from this fraudulent transfer and determine appropriate restitution to the Whitmore heirs and other affected parties. The judge removed her glasses and looked at Sarah. Mrs. Mitchell, in my 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a case like this. A century-old crime exposed by a pregnant widow with nothing to lose. A conspiracy reaching from 1918 to the present day, finally unraveled by one woman's courage. Her voice softened. The court commends your bravery, and while legal proceedings will continue for months or years, I want you to know that what you did here matters. What you found matters. The truth matters. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. At 5:23 p.m., Sarah walked out of the courthouse into chaos. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, supporters cheering, the world waiting to hear from the woman who had brought down an empire. Margaret helped her to a microphone that had been set up on the steps. Mrs. Mitchell, what do you have to say about the verdict? Sarah looked out at the sea of faces, at the descendants of Whitmore workers who had waited generations for this moment, at the journalists who would carry her words across the world, at the ordinary people who had followed her story and found hope in it. I didn't do this alone, she said. I had help from Margaret Chen, whose family was destroyed by the Garrison crimes, from Eleanor Crane, who carried her grandmother's guilt until she found the courage to speak, from Ruth Henderson, who witnessed the original murder and finally told her story after 93 years of silence. Sarah placed her hand on her belly. And I had help from my daughter, who isn't born yet, but who kicked me forward every time I wanted to stop, who reminded me that the future was worth fighting for. A reporter called out, "What happens now?" Now the legal process continues. There will be trials, appeals, complications I can't predict, but the truth is out. It can't be buried again, and that's what matters. Another reporter, "What about the money? Are you going to claim your share of the Garrison estate?" Sarah smiled. "Any money I receive will go toward creating a foundation. The Abigail Whitmore Foundation, dedicated to helping women and families who have been victimized by powerful people, to making sure what happened to Abigail never happens again." At 6:15 p.m., Sarah's father arrived at the courthouse. He pushed through the crowd, looking lost and overwhelmed until he found his daughter. "Sarah." "Dad?" They stood facing each other, decades of distance between them, a lifetime of pain and misunderstanding. Then her father pulled her into a hug. "I'm sorry, Hamul," he whispered, "for everything, for not being there, for not understanding, for not seeing how strong you are. You're here now, that's what matters." Elizabeth Chen approached slowly. Sarah's father turned to face the mother he had never known. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice breaking. "Mom!" The old woman opened her arms, and her son walked into them. Sarah watched them embrace, two generations of Garrison victims finally reunited. Around them cameras flashed and reporters shouted, but none of that mattered. What mattered was healing. What mattered was truth. What mattered was the family she was building from the wreckage of the one that had been destroyed. At 8:34 p.m., Sarah felt the first contraction. She was at a celebration dinner with Margaret Eleanor, Ruth Daniel, her father, and Elizabeth when the pain hit. Sharp, unmistakable. "Sarah?" Margaret saw her face change. "What's wrong?" "I think my daughter decided she doesn't want to wait anymore." The next few hours were a blur of hospital corridors, medical personnel, and increasingly intense contractions. Sarah gripped Eleanor's hand through the worst of it, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. At 11:47 p.m., her daughter came into the world. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, healthy lungs, perfect fingers and toes, a full head of dark hair. Sarah held her daughter for the first time and felt something crack open in her chest. Not grief, not relief, something bigger than both. "Hello, baby girl," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." "What's her name?" the nurse asked. Sarah looked at Margaret, who nodded with tears streaming down her face. "Abigail. Her name is Abigail Rose Mitchell, after the woman who never gave up, after the truth that waited 100 years to be told." At 12:15 a.m., Ruth Henderson came to see the baby. The 93-year-old woman stood at Sarah's bedside, looking at the newborn with wonder. "She's beautiful. She's everything." "You know," Ruth said softly, "I was there when Abigail Whitmore found out she was pregnant with Elizabeth. She was so happy, so hopeful. She thought her baby would grow up in a world of love and security. Instead, Elizabeth grew up alone, abandoned, lied to. Yes, but Elizabeth's granddaughter changed that. Elizabeth's granddaughter found the truth and set everything right." Ruth touched the baby's tiny hand. "This little one won't grow up with lies. She'll grow up knowing who she is, where she came from, what her mother did to give her a future. I hope she's proud of me someday." She will be. How could she not be? 6 months later, the Whitmore mansion was transformed. Sarah stood in the foyer, now restored to its original grandeur, holding baby Abigail on her hip. The crystal chandelier sparkled overhead. The hardwood floors gleamed beneath their feet. Today was the grand opening of the Whitmore Historical Foundation. The mansion had been converted into a museum dedicated to telling the true story of the Whitmore family and exposing the century of corruption that had followed their destruction. Margaret Chen stood beside her as guests filed in for the dedication ceremony. "Are you ready for this?" "I think so." Sarah looked around at the transformed space. "It feels strange. This is where I found Abigail's trunk, where Arthur tried to kill me, and now it's a place of healing." That's exactly what it should be. The ceremony was beautiful. Margaret spoke about her family's journey. Eleanor talked about her grandmother's guilt and redemption. Ruth, now 94, told her story one final time for the assembled crowd. And then it was Sarah's turn. She walked to the podium, baby Abigail asleep in her arms, and looked out at the hundreds of people who had gathered. 18 months ago, I was a pregnant widow facing eviction. I took a job cleaning this house because I was desperate. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. She smiled at the irony. What I found was more than I ever imagined. A trunk full of secrets, a journal full of courage, a truth that had waited 100 years to be spoken. Sarah looked at her daughter. This is Abigail Rose Mitchell, named after the woman who hid that trunk, who believed that someday someone would find it, who never gave up even when everything seemed lost. She raised her eyes to the crowd. Abigail Whitmore was 34 years old when she died. My age. She had a daughter, Elizabeth, who was 2 years old. The same age my daughter will be when I'm 34. Her voice strengthened. But the difference is that my daughter will grow up knowing the truth. She'll know that her mother fought for justice. She'll know that ordinary people can change the world. She'll know that the truth matters even when powerful people try to bury it. Sarah took a deep breath. Arthur Garrison Pierce is serving life in prison without possibility of parole. The Garrison Pierce Foundation has been dissolved, its assets returned to the families that were victimized. The names of Charles Garrison's victims are now carved in stone in this very building, remembered forever. She looked at the portrait of Abigail Whitmore that hung above the fireplace. Abigail never got to see justice. She died believing she had failed. But she didn't fail. She planted a seed. She hid the truth and trusted that someone would find it. Sarah's voice rang through the restored mansion. I was that someone, and I want everyone here today to know that you can be that someone too. You can stand up against injustice. You can speak when powerful people want you silent. You can change the world. She held her daughter higher. This is the world we're building, a world where truth matters, where courage counts, where the Abigail Whitmores don't die forgotten and alone. The crowd erupted in applause. Later that evening, Sarah walked through the empty mansion alone. Baby Abigail was with her grandfather, who had moved to Hartford to be close to his daughter and his newfound mother. The guests had all gone home. The caterers had packed up. Sarah climbed the stairs to the third floor to the servants' quarters to the room where she had found the hidden door. The door was still there, preserved now as part of the museum. A plaque beside it explained its significance. How a desperate pregnant woman had discovered what generations of Garrison agents had failed to find. Sarah touched the doorframe. I did it, Abigail, she whispered. I found your truth. I told your story. I gave your great-granddaughter the justice you never had. She imagined she could feel a presence in the room. Not a ghost exactly, more like an echo, a residue of courage that had seeped into the walls over a century of waiting. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for believing. Thank you for hiding the truth where I could find it. Sarah turned to leave. At the doorway, she paused and looked back one final time. Rest now, Abigail. Your story has been told. Your truth has been spoken, and your name will never be forgotten. She walked down the stairs and out into the Hartford evening. The mansion stood behind her, no longer a place of secrets and shadows. Now it was a beacon, a testament, a promise that truth would always find its way to light. Baby Abigail would grow up knowing this story. She would bring her children here someday, and her grandchildren. They would learn about the woman who hid a trunk in an attic and the woman who found it 100 years later. They would learn that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. They would learn that justice was always worth fighting for. And they would learn that the truth, no matter how long it was buried, could never be destroyed. Sarah Mitchell had walked into the Whitmore mansion with nothing but desperation and a cleaning job. She had walked out with a daughter, a purpose, and a little proof that one person's courage could change the world. The Garrison Empire had fallen. The Whitmore truth had risen. And in the end, love had conquered legacy. Courage had defeated corruption, and a pregnant widow with everything to lose had won everything worth having. That was the story. That was the truth. And that truth would echo through generations, inspiring others to speak when silence seemed safer to fight, when surrender seemed easier to believe, that justice was always possible. Always possible. Always worth fighting for. Always.